Chapter 943. He felt extremely grateful towards Fairy Baihua. Although Fairy Baihua had killed off everyone from Qin Shuru's faction, Qin Shuru knew very well that Fairy Baihua had only done so to avoid making things difficult for Qin Shuru. For that reason, Fairy Baihua was willing to be the bad guy. At any rate, Fairy Baihua did not care what others thought of her. In this world, the only person she cared about was Xiaochen. After destroying Qin Feng's faction, the following matters became much simpler. Qin Shuru simply announced that Qin Shan would succeed the position of patriarch of the Qin family. Truth be told, Qin Shan's personality was not suitable for the position of patriarch. However, there was no other choice. At present, besides Qin Shan, no one else was qualified to be the patriarch of the Qin family. Additionally, despite Qin Shan's cowardly personality, he was much more honest compared to Qin Feng. As such, while Qin Shan might not be able to lead the Qin family to a great development, he could at least ensure the safety of the Qin family. This was what Qin Shuru wanted to see the most. She did not ask for the Qin family to become strong. She only hoped that the members of the Qin family could live in peace. Naturally, if there were any outstanding disciples amongst the younger generation of the Qin family, Qin Shuru would definitely arrange for them to join the new sect that he was about to establish. Without the obstruction of Qin Feng's faction, Qin Shan smoothly ascended to the position of patriarch. After that, he stayed in the Qin family for another day. Only then did Qin Shuru and Fairy Baihua return to Nine Firmaments Palace. Earlier, Xiaochen had already sent a message to Qin Shuru, telling him to return to Nine Firmaments Palace directly. They had already left Heavenly Duke Mountain. The change in the Qin family did not attract too much attention. As for Qin Shan's succession to the position of family head, it was done in a low-key manner. As such, outsiders were unaware of the change in the Qin family. At that very moment, everyone in the Heavenly Qin mainland was focused on Nine Firmaments Palace. All the famous characters in the Heavenly Qin mainland were gathered there. They safely returned to Nine Firmaments Palace. After meeting up with Xiaochen, Qin Shuru did not hide anything from her. He told her everything about the Qin family. Xiaochen did not say anything about that. She simply pulled Qin Shuru into her embrace and said softly, "Brother, you are the one with the Qin family. Don't think too much about it. There are always black sheep in every big family. Just get rid of them." He did not blame Qin Shuru. On the contrary, he comforted him. To Xiaochen, the Qin family was not worth his attention, let alone Qin Feng. She hinted at Qin Shuru not to think too much about it. Now that Qin Feng's bloodline had been eliminated, the Qin family would be better off in the future. After being comforted by Xiaochen, Qin Shuru snuggled into Xiaochen's embrace and nodded slightly. In the next few days, as the banquet was about to begin, Xiaochen and the others did not go out. However, there was an endless stream of people coming to visit them every day. Almost all the experts from the various big families and sects came to visit Xiaochen. It could not be helped. These people knew very well that in the Heavenly Qin mainland, you could ignore other people. However, you could not ignore Xiaochen. He was a monstrous character who had left behind too many legends. Although Xiaochen was still young, his deeds had been widely spread in the Heavenly Qin mainland. Everything about Xiaochen was talked about enthusiastically. With so many people coming to visit, Xiaochen naturally could not meet all of them. Other than some people who he could not refuse, Xiaochen left the others to Qin Yao and Qin Luo. It was indeed somewhat belittling to let the maids receive the experts from all over the Heavenly Qin mainland. However, no one dared to show any dissatisfaction. On the contrary, even when facing Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and the other maids of Xiaochen, these important figures were all respectful. They did not dare to treat the 6 women as maids. After interacting with these important figures every day, Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and Qin Yao's temperament gradually changed. If they were not Xiaochen's maids, no one would be able to tell. From the way they talked and their temperament, it was impossible to associate them with maids. The 6 women gradually matured. Not only did they do a good job in taking care of Xiaochen and the others, but they were also fully competent in other matters. Xiaochen was naturally happy about this. Therefore, Xiaochen was very assured to leave these matters to the 6 women. With Qing Yao, Qing Luo, and Qing Luo helping him deal with the experts from the various large clans and sects, Xiaochen was free. However, during this period, people from the Xiao clan naturally came to visit Xiaochen. Xiaochen naturally had to personally greet the people from the Xiao clan. Not only Xiaochen, but even Xiaoqing also showed up. After returning to the Heavenly Qin mainland, Xiaochen and his family had not had the time to visit the current Xiao clan. However, after chatting for a while, Xiaochen and his father knew that the current Xiao clan had undergone a complete transformation. The glory of the sacred clan was also slowly recovering. Xiaochen and Xiaoqing were very gratified by the growth of the Xiao clan. After all, the Xiao clan was their root. It did not take long for the day of the banquet to arrive. On this day, countless wooden seats had been set up on the Heavenly Sword Peak that was once 9 Firmaments Palace's Heavenly Sword Peak, from the foot of the mountain all the way to its summit. The Sky Sword Peak was the location of the banquet this time. Many people came. No matter who they were, they all wanted to attend this banquet. Based on their status and cultivation, there were people seated from the foot of the mountain to the peak of the mountain. Of course, the closer one was to the peak of the mountain, the higher one's status was. However, there were very few people who could sit at the peak of the mountain for this banquet. Only Xiao Sheng and the other patriarchs, Xiaochen, Chenling, and the other holy sons and holy daughters, as well as the 9 Firmaments Saint and other Sage Realm experts. Even Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls were not qualified to sit at the peak of the mountain. They were slightly behind Xiaochen and the others. On the peak of the mountain, there were a total of more than 10 tables and chairs. Among them, Xiao Sheng and the other 3 naturally sat at the main seats. On the left side of the 4 seats were the 9 Firmaments Saint and the other holy sons and holy daughters, while on the right side were Xiaochen and the other holy sons and holy daughters. Below them were Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls, as well as Guduya and the others, as well as those who had gone to the Tianhao continent to train with them. According to their status and cultivation, they lined up at the foot of the mountain. When the banquet began, the entire Sky Sword Peak was completely lively. Everyone drank and chatted. During the banquet, beautiful maids shuttled back and forth between the banquet, constantly serving food and wine to everyone. The atmosphere was very lively. However, in addition to chatting, everyone's eyes were fixed on the peak of the mountain. Everyone knew that the person on the peak of the mountain would be the master of the Tianqian continent from now on. At the same time, everyone was very curious about the identity of Randeng Kozai and the other 2 who were sitting at the main seats. They had never seen them before. The people of the Tianqian continent had an impression of Xiao Sheng. However, they did not know anything about Randeng Kozai and the other 2. However, since they were able to stand side by side with Xiao Sheng, they were obviously not ordinary people. Please collect, vote, recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 944. Countless pairs of eyes stared at Xiao Sheng's group of 4 at the top of the mountain. It was undeniable that the 4 of them were the true protagonists of the banquet. Even though the 4 of them had only been drinking quietly since the banquet began and had not done anything special, everyone's gaze still remained fixed on them. In fact, the people of the Heavenly Qin continent were curious about Xiao Sheng's resurrection, but they naturally did not ask. Moreover, Xiao Sheng's resurrection was a good thing for the Heavenly Qin continent. Therefore, although the crowd was puzzled, they did not dwell on the matter too much. However, they were very curious about the identities of Randeng Kozai and the other 2. What kind of people could be on the same level as Xiao Sheng? The banquet continued and the atmosphere was very lively. Unknowingly, the sky gradually darkened and the sun set in the west. The banquet was coming to an end. Just when everyone thought the banquet was about to end, a voice suddenly came from the top of the mountain. The voice came from the Saint of 9 Firmaments. Everyone, please be quiet for a moment. Allow me to introduce the 4 great ancestors. Finally, it was time to get to the main topic. Following the Saint of 9 Firmaments' voice, the entire Tianjian peak quieted down. Everyone stared at the top of the mountain. At the same time, the Saint of Nine Firmaments introduced Xiaosheng and the other three ancestors one by one. There was no need to mention Xiaosheng. Everyone had heard of him. As for ancient sage Randang and the other two, under the introduction of Nine Firmaments Saint, everyone knew that they were the old ancestors from the Sky River continent. Ancient sage Randang and the other two had contributed greatly to repelling the army of demonic cultivators. Seeing that even the Saint of Nine Firmaments was respectful to Randang Kozai and the other two, everyone stood up and bowed respectfully to Randang Kozai and the other two. Greetings, ancestors. Randang Kozai and the other two were not from the heavenly Qin continent, but the heavenly Qin continent was indebted to them and they were very powerful. Therefore, no one objected to being addressed as ancestor. This was how the world worked. If you had strength, you would naturally gain the respect of others. Seeing this, the Saint of the Nine Heavens continued to speak. Today, I have invited everyone here to Nine Firmaments Palace not only to celebrate the rebirth of our heavenly Qin continent, but also to discuss something with everyone here. At this point, the Saint of the Nine Heavens paused and glanced at the crowd before continuing. Everyone should know that our heavenly Qin continent was in imminent danger when faced with the invasion of the demonic cultivator army. Fortunately, with everyone's efforts, we were able to avert the disaster. However, the price that our heavenly Qin continent paid was not small. Only a quarter of the warriors who went to the heavenly river continent with us came back alive. The rest fell in the heavenly river continent. This is very sad. After this incident, we old fellows have thought about it again and again. We want to gather all the forces of the heavenly river continent and the heavenly Qin continent to establish a new sect so that everyone on the two continents can have a better cultivation environment. Everyone will have the possibility of becoming a powerhouse so that the past will not repeat itself. The Saint of the Nine Heavens finally spoke about the establishment of a new sect. The reason why the Saint of the Nine Heavens was asked to speak instead of Xiaosheng and the other three was because of the situation of the heavenly Qin continent. After all, compared to Xiaosheng and the other three, the Saint of the Nine Heavens was definitely more prestigious in the heavenly Qin continent. This had nothing to do with strength. It was entirely because the people of the heavenly Qin continent did not know Randang Kozai and the other three. As the Saint of the Nine Heavens finished speaking, everyone looked at each other. Establishing a new sect was something no one had expected. Naturally, some people were happy, while others were sad. However, the Saint of the Nine Heavens did not care about this. After he finished speaking, the Saint of Pill Cloud, Saint of Mutian, Saint of Heavenly Elixir, and the others all spoke up. The saints spoke one after another, clarifying the necessity of establishing a new sect. At the same time, they clearly told everyone that the establishment of a new sect was inevitable. No one had the ability to stop it. Whether it was the heavenly Qin continent or the heavenly river continent, a new sect was needed to control both continents. This was beneficial for everyone. The saints supported the reward of establishing a new sect. Hearing this, the powerhouses of the major families and sects below all had their own thoughts. They were constantly thinking about the establishment of a new sect. They repeatedly weighed the pros and cons in their hearts, but on the surface, no one dared to refute. After all, it was the saints who had spoken this time. Anyone with a brain would obviously not refute the saints in front of everyone at this time. Otherwise, they would be asking for trouble. No one refuted. Of course, no one expressed their support. The saints had obviously expected this. Therefore, after the saints finished speaking, the seven major forces, led by the Nine Heavens Palace, quickly made clear that they were willing to fully support the establishment of a new sect. The seven major forces had clearly expressed their support for the reward of establishing a new sect. In this regard, the people of the major families and sects were not stupid. They knew that this was the means of the saints. After all, the seven major forces were under the control of the saints. Since the establishment of a new sect was proposed by the saints, what reason did the seven major forces have not to support it? However, even though the seven major forces had already expressed their stance, everyone still had doubts in their hearts. The most important question was the balance of the pros and cons. It was undeniable that after the establishment of a new sect, there would be benefits, but there would also be disadvantages. Once the new sect was established, all the clans and sects present would have to disband and join the new sect unconditionally. That meant that the former leaders of the major families and sects would have their power taken away unconditionally. Besides, with their status, they didn't know what benefits they would receive after joining the new sect. They didn't know anything yet, but they had to give up their power and disband their own sect. That made them uncomfortable. The ruler of the continent of the Nine Heavens said, as if he knew what they were thinking. Actually, you don't need to worry. After joining the new sect, I can guarantee you that you will receive more cultivation resources than you do now. Besides, after the establishment of the new sect, your sects and clans don't have to disband. You can continue to be the leaders of your clans and sections. Talented disciples of your clans and sects will also have the opportunity to join the new sect and receive better cultivation resources. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 945. Xiao Sheng and the others knew that the rewards of the new sect would affect the interests of the great sects and clans. Therefore, they had already come up with a plan. They wanted to use the situation of the Tianhe continent as a reference to establish the new sect. They didn't need to disband their sects and clans. To put it bluntly, after the new sect was established, those sects and clans would be external sections. They would still manage them, just like the relationship between the ancient holy sect and Tianfeng Xingzong back in the Tianhe continent. Of course, in order to manage them more efficiently, after the new sect was established, the names of those sects and clans had to be changed. At the same time, there were many rules to manage those external sects, but the ruler of the continent of the Nine Clouds hadn't said anything yet. They had to take things one step at a time. As expected, when the ruler of the continent of the Nine Clouds said that, everybody's expression softened. It wasn't difficult to accept. They could continue to be the patriarch of their respective clans, and at the same time, they could have a powerful backer. They couldn't refuse. Everybody's biggest worries were dispelled. Very quickly, many people expressed their willingness to support the establishment of the new sect. When the saints of the Nine Clouds saw that, they smiled. As expected, as long as it didn't affect their interests, they wouldn't refuse. But maybe they didn't know that it wasn't easy to become an external sect of the new sect. The new sect had many rules to restrict external sections. He had achieved the desired result. Seeing that no one was against it anymore, the banquet had come to a perfect end. Actually, the saints already had a detailed plan for the rewards of the new sect. They didn't need to say much about the external sects and clans. They just needed to change their names. It wasn't too troublesome. As for the inner sect, according to the vision of Xiao Sheng and the other great ancestors, the inner sect would be composed of the 7 overlords of the Tianqian continent, the ancient saint sect, the heavenly saint sect, and the sun saint sect of the Tianhe continent. One thing worth mentioning was that the 3 great sects of the ancient sacred sect included outer sects like the heavenly wind saint. When the time came, all these outer sects would be merged into the new sect. The 7 overlords and the 3 sacred sects combined to form the inner sect of the new sect, and the small sects and clans on the 2 continents formed the outer sect. In this way, the general framework of the new sect was formed. After the announcement of the establishment of the new sect, the banquet ended not long after. Everyone present also left the Sky Sword Peak one after another. After Xiao Chen and the rest returned to their residence, Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru, and the other 2 ladies did not immediately rest because they had drunk a lot of wine. Instead, they leisurely drank tea and chatted in the garden. Gulingji. When he heard that, Xiao Chen nodded with a smile. Oh. But I didn't expect those people to agree so readily today. Gu Lingyao said with a smile after hearing Xiao Chen's words. She was a smart girl. This little girl was very clever. Her words sounded innocent, but Xiao Chen knew that this little girl had already guessed that there would be a large-scale purge when the new sect was established in the future. When that time came, it was unknown how many of the clan leaders and sect leaders would still be alive. In fact, this was normal. When the saints established the new sect, they would establish an internal sect and an external sect. the existing large sects and clans would form the entire external sect system. However, although they were external sects, they still had to obey the management of the new sect. When the time came, the power of these family and clan leaders would be weakened. Therefore, there would naturally be people who wouldn't agree. Xiaochen guessed that this time, Xiaosheng and the other 4 ancestors would never let the new sect go beyond their control, especially the large number of external sections. Therefore, when the time came, the consequences of those who didn't agree could be imagined. Of course, this was unavoidable. After all, they had spent so much effort. They certainly couldn't let the new sect be divided. This was absolutely not allowed. Moreover, from now on, there could only be one voice in the Tiana continent and the Tianshan continent. This was for sure. So, naturally, there would be bloodshed. Xiaochen shook his head with a wry smile. These things weren't for him to think about. Anyway, when the time came, there would naturally be someone to deal with it. Xiaochen didn't need to worry. The establishment of the new sect was thus decided. Although there were still many things that hadn't been clarified, it didn't hinder anything. The road had to be taken one step at a time. Early the next morning, Xiaochen was cultivating in the courtyard when the 9 Heavens Saint came to visit. He said that the ancestors wanted to see him. Hearing that Xiaosheng and the others wanted to see him, Xiaochen didn't say much. He immediately rushed to their residence. On the mountain behind 9 Heavens Palace, Xiaochen met Xiaosheng and the others. Seeing Xiaochen arrive, Xiaosheng pointed to the bamboo chair beside him, indicating for Xiaochen to sit down, and then said with a smile, "Little guy, we're going to go into seclusion today. After we break through to the quasi-saint realm, we'll help you break through to the Tao Emperor realm." Xiaosheng and the others were preparing to go into seclusion to break through to the quasi-saint realm. Xiaochen wasn't surprised by this and nodded in response. Seeing this, Xiaosheng continued. "Also, we plan to set up the headquarters of the new sect on the Tianshan continent. After all, you know the situation on the Tiana continent. It's not suitable to establish a new sect. They plan to establish the new sect on the Tianshan continent." In this regard, Xiaochen was a little confused at first, but he soon figured it out. In the previous battle with the demon race, the Tiana continent was basically ruined. All kinds of heavenly materials and earthly treasures were mined without limit. At this time, almost no treasures could be found on the entire Tiana continent. Because of the consumption of the battle, the cultivation environment on the Tiana continent had become very poor. It was far inferior to the current Tianshan continent. Therefore, it was understandable that Xiaosheng and the others wanted to establish the new sect on the Tianshan continent. Nodding, he agreed with the decision of the 4 ancestors. After chatting for a while, Xiaochen bid farewell and left. Xiaosheng and the others also went to the land of origin to start breaking through to the quasi-saint realm. There was no need to worry about Xiaosheng and the others breaking through to the quasi-saint realm. With the accumulation of the 4 of them in the saint realm, breaking through to the quasi-saint realm was a certainty. Now that they had the power of origin, they believed that the 4 of them would be able to complete the breakthrough soon. Moreover, Xiaosheng also said that this breakthrough to the quasi-saint realm would take at least 1 month and 2 months. At the same time, Randeng Koziai and the others had also sent people back to the Tiana continent and asked the powerhouses of the Tiana continent to lead the disciples of the Tiana continent to the Tianshan continent to prepare to establish the new sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. This chapter ends. Chapter 946. The headquarters of the new sect would be established in the Tianshan continent. As for the Tiana continent, it would be enough to leave some people to guard it. There was no need to worry about the safety of the Sky River continent, because once the new sect was established, it would naturally build a cross-realm teleportation array between the 2 continents. Therefore, if anything happened to the Sky River continent, the saints could use this cross-realm teleportation array to rush to the Sky River continent. It could be said that Xiaosheng and the other 3 had already considered all kinds of matters regarding the establishment of the new sect. After returning to his residence, Xiaochen saw Qingyao, who had been waiting for him as soon as he entered the door. Qingyao bowed to Xiaochen and said sweetly, Young master, master and madam are looking for you. The master and madam that Qing Yao mentioned were naturally Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue. Hearing this, Xiao Chen smiled and said, "Okay, I'll go over now." Xiao Chen didn't know why his parents were looking for him, but he still went straight to the backyard and came to the courtyard where Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue lived. As soon as he entered, Xiao Chen saw Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue enjoying the cool air in the courtyard. At the same time, there was a middle-aged man sitting beside Xiao Qing. Xiao Chen also knew this person. If he counted, he should be Xiao Chen's uncle and Xiao Qing's cousin. His name was Xiao Muqin, the current master of the Xiao family. Seeing Xiao Chen walking over, Xiao Qing laughed and scolded, "You little brat, where did you run off to so early in the morning? Your uncle is here, but you didn't come to greet him." "Father, mother, and uncle, good day." Hearing Xiao Qing's laughter, Xiao Chen also smiled bitterly and greeted the three of them. Seeing this, Xiao Muqin was at a loss. He personally got up and helped Xiao Chen up and said with a smile, "I haven't seen you for so many years. Chinner has grown up, ha." Xiao Chen didn't have much influence on Xiao Muqin. However, in his memory, Xiao Muqin was the person who had the best relationship with his father, Xiao Qing. Although the two of them were only cousins, they had played together since they were young. In terms of relationship, they were even closer than biological brothers. It was precisely because of this that Xiao Chen agreed to let Xiao Muqin become the head of the Xiao family. After all, although Xiao Chen did not have any thoughts about the Xiao clan, it was still his own clan, after all. The person in charge naturally had to be someone close to his family, or someone who he could command. That was the only way to make it work. Moreover, Xiao Muqin had indeed managed the Xiao family well over the years. Therefore, Xiao Chen was quite satisfied with Xiao Muqin as the head of the family. After praising Xiao Chen with a smile, Xiao Muqin enthusiastically pulled Xiao Chen to the pavilion and sat down. At the same time, Bai Ruyue also spoke up. "Chinner, your father and I plan to pay a visit to the Xiao family. It's been so many years, it's time to go back and take a look." She asked Xiao Chen to come here mainly for this matter. Hearing this, Xiao Chen nodded and said, "Yes, it's time to go back and take a look. It just so happens that I have nothing to do during this time, so I'll go back with my parents." He knew that his parents were homesick, and it just so happened that Xiao Sheng and the other three were in seclusion. Xiao Chen also had nothing to do, so he agreed to go back to the Xiao family with his parents. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Bai Ruyue was naturally very happy. They agreed to set off tomorrow. After that, Xiao Chen chatted with his parents and Xiao Muqin for a while before leaving. After returning to his courtyard, Xiao Chen told Qin Shuru and the other two girls about going to the Xiao family. The three girls immediately said that they wanted to go together. After all, they had nothing to do in Nine Firmaments Palace. Early the next morning, they prepared to set off. However, there were a lot of people going with them. Xiao Chen did not expect that just Xiao Chen's family alone had more than 10 people. Xiao Chen, Xiao Qing, Bai Ruyue, Qin Shuru and the other two girls, Qing Yao, Qing Luo, and the other two maids. In addition, Long Qing, Chen Ling, and Qin Yu had heard the news from somewhere and had rushed over early, saying that they wanted to go to Lingshan County with Xiao Chen. There were a lot of people going with them. The group left Nine Firmaments Palace in a grandiose manner. As they did not have anything to do, they were not in a hurry. Along the way, they stopped and visited many places in the heavenly Qin mainland. Along the way, they fulfilled Xiao Chen's promise. He brought Qin Yu and the other three girls to visit the heavenly Qin mainland. This made Qin Yu and the others very happy. Just like that, they traveled and visited the Lingshan County. It took them an entire month to reach the Lingshan County. It was a remote place located in the easternmost part of the heavenly Qin mainland. However, the present Lingshan County was very different from before. Although it was located in a remote area, the Lingshan County was extremely famous in the heavenly Qin mainland. The reason for that was because the Xiao family of Lingshan County was once a sacred clan. Additionally, in this generation, Xiao Chen, a monstrous genius, had appeared. After not returning for several decades, the Lingshan County had changed greatly. It had become much more prosperous. The small cities that were once there had now become large and bustling cities. The area had expanded greatly and the city was bustling with activity. That was especially true for the Lingshan County where the Shao family resided. It was extremely prosperous, in no way inferior to the few great cities in the Divine Central region. Compared to before, the area of the Lingshan County city had expanded by more than 10 times. Around the original old city, a larger new city had been built. At the same time, as this was the Shao family's headquarters, warriors from all over the world had gathered here. These people came from all over the world. Some came here to travel and experience the power of the sacred clan. Some wanted to become a consecrator of the Shao family. There were even some who directly moved their families to the Lingshan County city, intending to settle down here. Regardless of their motives, the current Lingshan County city could be said to be the most popular city in the entire Heavenly Qin mainland. Without disturbing the others, Shao Chen and the others entered the city through the city gates like ordinary people and strolled along the streets of the Lingshan County city. It had been a long time since he returned home. Shao Chen felt a myriad of emotions as he looked at the unfamiliar yet familiar Lingshan County city in front of him. One must remember that when he was young, when he was only in his teens, he walked out of the small Lingshan County city. At that time, Shao Chen was still a fledgling. It was from here that Shao Chen embarked on the path of martial arts. It could be said that Lingshan County city was the place where Shao Chen was born. It was also the starting point for him to embark on the path of martial arts. It was also his first time in the Lingshan County city. Gu Lingyao was very excited. She surrounded Shao Chen and chattered non-stop. Gu Lingyao's lively and cute appearance made Bai Ruyue very fond of her. Unconsciously, she began to tell everyone about Shao Chen's childhood. Being able to listen to this evildoer's childhood story naturally whetted everyone's appetite. Soon, not only Gu Lingyao, but even Qin Shuru, Fairy of 100 Flowers, Chen Ling, and Long Qin gathered around Bai Ruyue and listened attentively to her story. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 947. Everyone unknowingly gathered around Bai Ruyue and listened to her talk about Shao Chen's childhood. In fact, there was nothing much to say about Shao Chen's childhood. Compared to children of the same age, Shao Chen was very mature. He was already very sensible when he was 5 or 6 years old. Moreover, Shao Qing and Bai Ruyue did not have to worry about his cultivation. Shao Chen was able to arrange his time in an orderly manner. Moreover, Shao Chen showed great talent when he first came into contact with martial arts cultivation. At that time, as a large family in Lingshan County, Shao Qing specially hired many teachers for Shao Chen. However, these teachers did not stay in the Shao family for long. The reason was very simple. Shao Chen's progress was too fast. In the end, these teachers basically had nothing to teach him. Thinking about it, when Shao Chen was young, Lingshan County was definitely the poorest place in the Heavenly Qin continent. The teachers who could be hired here definitely had very low cultivation and knowledge. Therefore, they did not have any real ability to teach Shao Chen. Shao Chen did not have too many embarrassing incidents when he was young. Perhaps there was nothing to talk about. In the end, Bai Ruyue simply told everyone about Shao Chen's bedwetting when he was young. I still remember when this kid wet his bed for the first time. Bai Ruyue said excitedly. Bai Ruyue said excitedly. But at this time, Shao Chen couldn't help but interrupt, "Mother, why are you talking about this? When did it happen? Yo, our great holy son Shao actually wet his bed. I thought you were a natural prodigy." Ha! Seeing Shao Chen's face turn red, Chen Yu immediately teased him with a mischievous smile. It was very normal for a child to wet his bed. Facing Chen Yu's teasing, Shao Chen said snappily, "You say it as if you have never wet your bed before." "Of course I have, but we are just ordinary people. How can we compare to a monster like you? Speaking of which, after hearing about your childhood, I feel that you are much more realistic." Sigh, it seems that there is no way to be perfect. Ha! Facing Xiao Chen's rebuttal, Qinyu laughed indifferently. Perhaps it was because Xiao Chen was usually too perfect. Now that they heard about Xiao Chen's childhood, everyone felt that it was more realistic. After all, no matter how heaven-defying Xiao Chen was, no matter how high his talent was, he was still an ordinary human like everyone else. He did not have 3 heads and 6 arms. However, even though they were teasing Xiao Chen, there were still some things that made them depressed. Especially when they found out that Xiao Chen actually came from a small city in the corner of the city. Everyone could not help but admire Xiao Chen's talent once again. Imagine, if Xiao Chen's birth was better, or if Xiao Chen was born in the Tiana continent, then Xiao Chen's current achievements would be much higher than now. It could be said that during Xiao Chen's childhood, the Xiao family could not give Xiao Chen much help. They only gave Xiao Chen some enlightenment. After that, Xiao Chen relied on himself. When he was in his teens, he left home alone and traveled all the way from Lingshan County until he entered the Eastern Sword Pavilion. Xiao Chen walked step by step alone. As they chatted, they unknowingly arrived at the entrance of the Xiao mansion. It wasn't as dazzling as the Qin mansion. Although the Xiao mansion had been renovated over the years and its area had expanded a lot, it was still very simple and there wasn't anything luxurious. Xiao Chen was very satisfied with the Xiao family's low profile. The group walked into the Xiao residence. After receiving the news that Xiao Qing and the others had returned, the Xiao family quickly rushed to the front yard. After so many years of development, the Xiao family's population had increased a lot. Many of the collateral relatives who had been wandering outside had also moved back to the Xiao residence. Moreover, many of the people of Xiao Chen's generation already had their own children after so many years. The population had increased a lot compared to before. Under the crowd's escort, Xiao Chen and his family arrived at the main hall. After everyone took their seats, it was inevitable that they would be enthusiastic. They chatted with each other and talked about the past. For a time, Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue were both moved and their eyes turned red. When they heard that the small courtyard where the family used to live was still preserved, Bai Rui could not help but go to the small courtyard where they used to live, accompanied by a few madams, to visit. In the Xiao residence, Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue could not help but recall the regretful past. Over the years, because they had such an outstanding son like Xiao Chen, the old couple's days could be said to be extremely rich and colorful. After experiencing so many things, people would naturally be nostalgic. Regarding this, Xiao Chen was also deeply touched. It was rare for them to return to the Xiao residence. Everyone stayed in the Xiao residence and was not in a hurry to return to Nine Firmaments Palace. Living in the courtyard that was once incomparably familiar to them, it was as if time had flowed back to when they were young. Someone once said that the home was everyone's harbor. Now, Xiao Chen finally understood the true meaning of this sentence. In the Xiao residence, facing the smiles of the clansmen every day, accompanying his parents in his free time, and teasing his nephews and nieces, his days were extremely comfortable. It was as if he had lived in the Xiao residence for half a month. On this day, Xiao Chen sat in the courtyard and drank tea as usual. Beside him were the 3 women of Qin Shuru and a few other clansmen of the Xiao residence. They could be considered as Xiao Chen's cousins. Not far away, there were more than a dozen of Xiao Chen's nephews and nieces making a scene. Xiao Chen had a sincere smile on his face as he looked at his nephews and nieces who were only 4 or 5 years old. This time, Xiao Chen naturally did not come back empty-handed. He also gave many good things to the clansmen of the Xiao residence, especially his nephews and nieces. Xiao Chen was not stingy. He even personally cleansed the marrow of these little fellows. With this, when they started to step onto the path of martial arts in the future, it would be easier for them. Facing these innocent children, Qin Shuru and the other 2 women at the sides seemed to have completely changed. Their eyes were filled with envy. The meaning was obvious. They also wanted to give birth to a son and 2 daughters for Xiao Chen and have a taste of what it was like to be a parent. Just as everyone was enjoying themselves, without any warning, for heavenly punishments suddenly descended from the sky in the central divine realm, which was extremely far away from Lingshan Commandery. The power of these 4 heavenly punishments was extremely terrifying. Even a saint would pale in the face of these 4 heavenly punishments. In the sky, 4 huge spatial black holes appeared. Through the holes, one could see thick bolts of heavenly lightning crisscrossing within these 4 spatial black holes. A terrifying pressure immediately swept across the land, causing countless people to be shocked. They could not help but look up at the sky. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 948. When the 4 heavenly punishments appeared at the same time, the pressure from the 4 heavenly punishments made one's hair stand on end. Almost everyone in the heavenly Qin continent could feel the terrifying pressure from the 4 heavenly punishments. Even though Shao Chen was in Lingshan Commandery City, he could still feel the heavenly punishments from the distant central divine territory. Such heavenly punishments far exceeded the heavenly punishments of the saint stage. There was only one explanation. The 4 heavenly punishments were formed when Shao Sheng and the other 4 patriarchs broke through to the quasi-saint stage. It had been almost 2 months since Shao Sheng and the other 4 patriarchs went into seclusion. According to Shao Sheng, it was indeed time for them to break through to the quasi-saint stage. Shao Chen gazed in the direction of the central divine territory. Although he couldn't see the sky of the central divine territory from where he was, he could clearly feel the terrifying heavenly punishments. In contrast to Shao Chen's calm demeanor, the other members of the Shao family, as well as the children who were only 5 or 6 years old, were all horrified. The children hid in the arms of the adults and looked at the sky with their innocent eyes from time to time. However, it was only a glance before they buried their heads back into their parents' arms. "Cousin, this?" One of the Shao family members asked Shao Chen in horror. Shao Chen smiled and said, "Don't worry, it'll be fine." Shao Chen knew that this was caused by Shao Sheng and the other 4 patriarchs breaking through to the quasi-saint stage, so he wasn't worried. Seeing this, the Shao family members heaved a sigh of relief. However, the grave expression on their faces showed that they were still very nervous. No one in the Tianqian continent had ever seen a quasi-saint level heavenly punishment. Even the saints had never seen a quasi-saint level heavenly punishment. Therefore, after the 4 heavenly punishment appeared, several figures appeared around the 4 heavenly punishment. They were the 9 firmament saint and the others. No one dared to get close to the heavenly punishments and could only watch from afar. However, even though they were far enough away, the 9 heaven saint and the others were still scared witless. Good heavens! If this were to happen to me, wouldn't I be reduced to ashes? Pill Cloud Saint laughed foolishly after taking a sip of wine. Hearing this, the heavenly Pill Saint snorted in annoyance. "You're so useless." As his wife, the heavenly Pill Saint did not give the Pill Cloud Saint any face at all. However, the Pill Cloud Saint did not care about this at all. His gaze was fixed on the 4 heavenly punishments in the sky, and he would occasionally take a sip of wine. Saints appeared saint stage. For heavenly punishments of the quasi-saint stage heavenly punishments. For heavenly punishments of the heavens saint stage punishments of the quasi-saint stage heavenly punishments. The 4 figures did not exude any terrifying aura. They were just like ordinary people. However, they gave off a feeling that they were the rulers of the world. It was as if they just stood there and did nothing. The 4 of them were the masters of the world. These 4 people were none other than Shao Sheng and the other 3. Their cultivations had already broken through from the sage-accomplished realm to the beginning of the quasi-sage realm. Shao Sheng and the other 3 appeared at this time. Their gazes were fixed on the 4 heavenly punishments in the sky. Shao Sheng said faintly with a wry smile on his face. The sky law of the quasi-saint realm really can't be underestimated. Compared to the heavenly punishment of the sage realm, the heavenly punishment of the quasi-sage realm was many times stronger. Anyone below the quasi-sage realm would definitely die upon contact with such a heavenly punishment. However, even though this was the case, Shao Sheng and the other 3 had all broken through to the quasi-sage realm. Perhaps only they knew that the difference in their strength was like the difference between heaven and earth. The four of them had been trapped in the sage-accomplished realm for thousands of years. They had long possessed the qualifications to break through to the quasi-sage realm. Now, they finally got what they wanted. Their strength was absolutely incomparable to before. They had finally entered the ranks of the quasi-sage realm. The improvement of their cultivation gave Xiao Sheng and the other three more confidence when facing the heavenly punishment of the quasi-sage realm. As Xiao Sheng's voice fell, four thick heavenly thunderbolts struck down from the four black holes in the sky as if they had been provoked. They went straight for Xiao Sheng and the other three. The heavenly punishment arrived as scheduled. In the face of the heavenly thunderbolts, a terrifying aura erupted from Xiao Sheng and the other three. As soon as this aura appeared, the expressions of Saint Jiuxiao and the others in the distance changed. Saint Mutian couldn't help but murmur softly. Is this the coercion of the quasi-sage realm? As soon as the coercion of the quasi-sage realm was released, the heavens and the earth seemed to change color. All the saints' expressions changed drastically, and they couldn't help but reveal a look of yearning in their eyes. Everyone felt that the saint realm was already an unattainable existence. However, they didn't know that the three realms of the saint realm, the sage realm, the quasi-sage realm, and the great sage realm, could be said to be a whole new level with each step. Without personal experience, one would never know how big the gap between the three realms of the saint realm was. For example, in the three realms of the saint realm, every breakthrough of a major realm was like a sublimation of life level. It could be said that the difference between the two realms was simply not on the same level. Saints were very strong, but in front of a quasi-sage, they couldn't make any waves at all. They could be suppressed with a flip of their hand. This was the difference between a quasi-sage and a saint. This was also why Xiao Sheng and the other old ancestors secretly prayed when they faced the northern demon continent. They hoped that there was no quasi-sage in the northern demon continent. Otherwise, no matter how hard the Tiana continent struggled, it would be impossible for them to win, let alone the 8 years of bloody war that followed. It was simply a fool's dream. The coercion of Xiao Sheng and the other three swept across the earth, forming an equal force with the heavenly punishment. At the same time, in the face of the four heavenly thunderbolts, Xiao Sheng and the other three made their moves one after another, forcibly colliding with the heavenly thunderbolts. In the face of the heavenly punishment, there was no need to think about escaping, because there was no way to escape. The only way was to resist it head-on. If one could withstand the heavenly punishment, it would mean success. Of course, if one couldn't withstand the heavenly punishment, they would only end up dead. The first heavenly punishment did not cause any serious injuries to Xiao Sheng and the other three, but this was just the beginning. Soon, the second heavenly punishment fell. This second heavenly punishment was twice as powerful as the first. Moreover, the color of the heavenly punishment had turned dark blue. It looked like a thunder dragon, roaring as it rushed out of the black hole and rushed straight toward Xiao Sheng and the other three. The power of law surrounded them, and terrifying spiritual fluctuations swept across the sky. Once again, Xiao Sheng and the other three collided fiercely with the heavenly punishment. The terrifying aftershock spread in all directions, and the powerful shock wave destroyed everything within a radius of 100 miles. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of this chapter. Chapter 949. It was as if the end of the world had come. As the second heavenly punishment fell, everything in the surroundings turned into ashes. Not even a blade of grass grew on the ground, as if it had been cut by a knife, leaving only a vast expanse of land that stretched as far as the eye could see. 2 heavenly punishments in a row had already stunned Saint Jiuxiao and the others. They were both heavenly punishments, but the heavenly punishments of the quasi-saint realm and the heavenly punishments of the saint realm were like fathers and sons. There was no comparison at all. After the baptism of the second heavenly punishment, Xiao Sheng and the others were also seriously injured. It could be seen that even though the 4 of them were quasi-saints, it was still difficult for them to resist the heavenly punishment. They gritted their teeth and persevered. Then, when the second heavenly punishment fell, the third one was already brewing. Saint Danyon laughed heartily when he felt that the heavenly might in the 4 spatial black holes had not decreased, but increased instead. Again? Does the quasi-saint realm have 3 heavenly punishments in a row? There was only 1 heavenly punishment in the saint realm, but there were 3 in the quasi-saint realm, and the power was even more terrifying. As the 3rd heavenly punishment fell, the sky seemed to have lost its color in an instant. The whole sky was illuminated by the lightning, and the sun could not be seen. Black thunder. The 3rd heavenly punishment was actually a black heavenly thunder, whistling out from the spatial black holes. Faced with the 3rd heavenly punishment, Shaoxing smiled bitterly and helplessly. Does this mean that you don't want me to live? Don't talk nonsense. Attack with all your might. I don't want to collect your corpse again. Hearing Shaoxing's complaint, Saint Ice Lotus, who was not far away, said grumpily. Then, she stared at the black thunder coming from the sky. Her whole body tensed up, and she was ready to attack with all her might at any time. Faced with the 3rd heavenly punishment of black thunder, Shaoxing and the others did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. Soon, the black thunder arrived as expected, and fiercely bombarded Shaoxing and the others. With just one touch, the defense around Shaoxing and the others was torn apart layer by layer like a piece of white paper. Regardless of whether it was spiritual energy or the power of laws, they were all as fragile as paper as they were torn apart layer by layer. Then, the black lightning ruthlessly struck the 4 people's bodies. Blood splattered everywhere, and their bodies felt like they were about to be torn apart. There was no other way. Shaoxing and the other 3 could only grit their teeth and persevere, trying their best to retain the last trace of consciousness. Around 10 minutes later, the black lightning slowly dissipated. The heavenly might from the 4 black holes in the sky also slowly dissipated. Clearly, the heavenly punishment had ended. Shaoxing and the other 3 naturally felt extremely fortunate. The 3rd bolt of heavenly punishment of black lightning had already severely injured them. If there was another bolt of heavenly punishment of black lightning, there was no doubt that the 4 of them would be blasted to death on the spot. The injuries on their bodies were extremely serious. They were already secondary saints, but right now, Shaoxing and the other 3 looked extremely miserable. Fortunately, they had managed to survive the divine punishment without any mishap. As for the injuries on their bodies, they would recover after a few days of rest. The attack of the divine punishment was different from other attacks. It seemed that Shaochen and the others were on their last breaths, but in fact, they did not suffer any internal injuries. The divine punishment was God's punishment for warriors, but at the same time, it was also a test. After passing it, there would be unexpected benefits. At the same time, the baptism of the divine punishment could also temper the physical body and stabilize the foundation. There were many benefits. At the same time, the injuries caused by the divine punishment would strangely not harm the warriors' meridians. As long as they did not die, they would recover very quickly. The black holes in the sky slowly closed, and Shaoxing and the other 3 were on the verge of collapse. Fortunately, the Saint of 9 Heavens hurried over from afar and supported Shaoxing and the others. "Ancestor, are you all right?" The Saint of 9 Heavens asked with concern as he supported Shaoxing. Faced with the Saint of 9 Heavens' question, Shaoxing forced a smile and said, "I'm all right. Let's go back first." The divine punishment had passed, and Shaoxing and the other 3 had survived safely. As such, the 4 of them could be considered to have truly become secondary saints. Hearing Shaoxing's words, the victor of 9 Heavens nodded. Then, under the care of a group of saints, the group quickly returned to 9 Heavens Palace. Because of the divine punishment, Shaoxing and the other 3 spent the next few days in seclusion on the mountain behind 9 Heavens Palace. After 10 days, Shaoxing and the other 3 finally came out of seclusion. There were no more injuries on their bodies, and their complexions were healthy. Because they had broken through to secondary saint, the 4 of them looked much younger. Their skin was as white as a baby's, making them look like young men and women in their 20s. This was especially true for Prime Saint Ice Lotus and Prime Saint Mingjie. They were actually old monsters who had lived for thousands of years. However, judging from their appearances, they were about the same age as Qin Shuru and the other two girls. Xiao Xing was the same. If no one said anything, who would have thought that Xiao Xing was actually Xiao Chen's ancestor? Judging from their appearances, the two of them were like brothers. Compared to Xiao Xing and the other two, Randang Kozai had a different personality. His skin was white, but his white hair hadn't changed much. He gave people a different feeling, as if he was a Dao expert. After surviving the divine punishment, the four of them had completely stabilized their newly broken secondary saint realm with the help of the divine punishment. Compared to 10 days ago, their auras were more profound and restrained. If they didn't deliberately release it, even saints would find it difficult to sense the auras of Xiao Sheng and the other three. At first glance, the four of them were no different from ordinary people. With a smile on his face, Xiao Sheng looked at Prime Saint Ice Lotus and the other three. Let's go and find Xiao Chen first. After the four of them had broken through, the next step was to help Xiao Chen cleanse his body and break through his cultivation. Hearing this, Prime Saint Ice Lotus and the other two nodded slightly. Since they had decided to support Xiao Chen to become the first saint of the new sect, Xiao Chen naturally couldn't just be a Dao sovereign. No matter what, he had to be a Dao emperor. Otherwise, wouldn't he be embarrassing the new sect? Knowing that Xiao Chen was now in the Xiao clan of Lingshan City, Xiao Sheng and the other three didn't inform anyone and directly rushed to Lingshan City. With the speed of the four secondary saints, it was almost as if they were riding a teleportation formation. In the blink of an eye, they appeared in the small courtyard where Xiao Chen lived without disturbing the Xiao clan. While he was cultivating, Xiao Sheng and the other three suddenly arrived. Xiao Chen also put away his sword and said with a smile, "Ancestor, congratulations on breaking through to the secondary saint stage." It was obvious that Xiao Sheng and the other three were already secondary saints. Hearing this, Xiao Sheng scolded with a smile, "All right, you're being hypocritical. Let's not talk nonsense. Find a cultivation room. The four of us will cleanse your body and help you break through." Without wasting any time, they went straight to the point. Hearing this, Xiao Chen led the four to the cultivation room. In the cultivation room, Xiao Chen sat cross-legged on a cushion while Xiao Sheng and the other three stood around Xiao Chen. They looked at each other and nodded slightly. Then, the four of them acted at the same time. For a time, streams of pure spiritual energy directly entered Xiao Chen's body and began to flow along Xiao Chen's meridians. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 950. Xiao Chen was probably the only one who could enjoy the treatment of four quasi-sages working together. He felt four different spiritual powers flowing through his body, but he did not feel uncomfortable at all. On the contrary, he felt very comfortable. These four spiritual powers were not absorbed by Xiao Chen. Of course, even if Xiao Chen wanted to, he could not do it. These were the spiritual powers of quasi-sages. Under the control of Xiao Sheng and the other three, these four spiritual powers slowly cleansed the impurities in Xiao Chen's meridians. With the circulation of these four spiritual powers, the impurities in Xiao Chen's meridians were constantly forced out of his body. Soon, Xiao Chen's skin was covered by a layer of black liquid that emitted a foul smell. Don't underestimate this small marrow cleansing. It should be known that using one's own spiritual power to cleanse someone's marrow was not a simple matter. Not only did it require extremely high control of spiritual power, but it also required a sufficiently domineering spiritual power. Neither of these two aspects could be omitted. If the spiritual power was not domineering enough, it would not be able to force out the impurities in the body. If the spiritual power was not controlled well enough, it was very likely that it would hurt Xiao Chen instead. This whole process did not allow the slightest bit of carelessness. It should be known that Xiao Chen now had the spiritual powers of four quasi-sages in his body. If there was a slight mistake, the spiritual powers of the quasi-sage realm could instantly turn Xiao Chen's meridians in essence into a completely useless person. Therefore, the marrow cleansing for Xiao Chen was an extremely strenuous task for Xiao Sheng and the other three. If it were not for the fact that they wanted Xiaochen to have the strength of the first holy sun, the four of them obviously would not have done this. However, in just a short while, the foreheads of Xiaosheng and the other three were covered with fine beads of sweat. It was obvious that the four of them had consumed a lot of spiritual power. This lasted for a whole hour. Then, Xiaosheng and the other three withdrew their spiritual powers at the same time. At the same time, Xiaochen also slowly opened his eyes. He could clearly feel that his body seemed to have relaxed a lot. He looked at Xiaosheng and the other three and smiled happily. "Ancestor, you're really amazing. The effect is much better than the marrow cleansing saint elixir. However, why do I feel that the impurities in my body have not been completely removed? You brat, the four of us are attacking at the same time. How can the marrow cleansing saint elixir compare to us? Moreover, do you think we can get rid of the impurities in your body in one go? Stop talking nonsense and rest for a day. We'll continue tomorrow." Upon hearing Xiaochen's words, Xiaosheng snapped. He then sat down cross-legged and began to regulate his breathing. In just 2 hours, Xiaosheng and the other three were exhausted, mainly because of the mental exhaustion. After all, they could not afford to make any mistakes. It was impossible to completely remove the impurities in Xiaochen's body in one go. Over the years in the Sky River continent, in order to quickly break through his cultivation, Xiaochen had taken a lot of pills and used the help of many cultivation mystic realms. As the saying goes, too much is as bad as too little. After so many pills and cultivation mystic realms accumulated over time, the impurities naturally settled in Xiaochen's body. Therefore, to completely cleanse Xiaochen's body and marrow, it was not something that could be done once or twice. This was mainly due to the fact that Xiaochen had been suppressing his cultivation for the past 8 years. He was also constantly consolidating his foundation and removing the impurities in his body. Otherwise, it would have taken even longer. In the next few days, Xiaochen enjoyed the cleansing of his body and marrow by Xiaosheng and the other three. In this regard, Xiaochen was very happy, but Xiaosheng and the other three were exhausted. At this time, the 4 quasi-sages were sweating profusely every day. Not only did they have to help Xiaochen cleanse his body and marrow, but they also had to give Qin Shuru and the other 2 women some benefits. Therefore, while helping Xiaochen cleanse his body and marrow, Xiaosheng and the other 3 also helped Qin Shuru and the other 2 women consolidate their foundation. Of course, the treatment of Qin Shuru and the other 2 women naturally could not be compared to Xiaochen. This was certain, but the 3 women had no complaints about this. Time passed day by day, and it took a full half a month for Xiaosheng and the other 3 to complete the cleansing of Xiaochen's body and marrow. When the last cleansing was completed, the last trace of impurities in Xiaochen's body was expelled. Xiaochen felt as if he had been reborn. This feeling was like a baby who had just been born. His whole body was incomparably pure and clean. It was a very good feeling, but Xiaosheng and the other 3 were almost driven crazy. 10 days was a torment for them. The 4 of them simply gritted their teeth and persevered for 2 hours every day. Finally, they completed the cleansing of their body and marrow. Next, they helped Xiaochen to improve his cultivation. Although Xiaosheng and the other 3 were quasi-sages, there was a certain degree of danger in forcibly improving their cultivation. Moreover, this method could only be used once at most. Otherwise, it would cause irreversible damage to Xiaochen's foundation. They rested for 3 days in a row. On this day, Xiaosheng's group and Xiaochen came to the cultivation room at the same time. Before they began, Xiaosheng restrained his usual casualness and spoke in an extremely serious manner. "Kid, the 4 of us helping you forcefully improve your cultivation doesn't mean that it'll be a 100% success rate. So during the entire process, you must remember that you absolutely can't force it. Once you feel that you're unable to break through, you must not advance rashly. You'd rather give up than forcefully break through the barrier of the Dao Emperor realm. Otherwise, your foundation in the martial Dao will be crippled. At that time, even the 4 of us won't be able to remedy it." This was not a joke, so Xiaosheng spoke in an extremely serious manner. Forcefully improving one's cultivation was indeed too risky. Everything could only be done naturally. If he could break through, then so be it. If he couldn't, then so be it. Xiaochen nodded heavily when he heard Xiaoxing's advice. After that, Xiaoxing's group of 4 didn't start right away. They allowed Xiaochen to adjust his state first, and they only started after an entire 2 hours had passed. Their spirit energy entered Xiaochen's body and helped Xiaochen start to charge into the barrier of the Tao Emperor realm. However, Xiaoxing and the others were very careful throughout the entire process, and they didn't dare use too much strength. On the other hand, with the help of Xiaoxing's group of 4, Xiaochen consciously observed the situation in his body carefully. Once he noticed that he couldn't continue, he would immediately stop charging into the Tao Emperor realm. Time flowed by slowly. For hours later, no matter if it was Xiaochen, Xiaoxing, or the others, dense beads of sweat appeared on their foreheads, and the sweat flowed down their faces and ceaselessly dripped to the ground. At the same time, Xiaochen finally sensed the critical factor to break through. With the help of Xiaoxing's group of 4, Xiaochen controlled the spirit energy within his body to charge swiftly towards the barrier of the Tao Emperor realm. Bang! A muffled bang resounded from within his body, and then the barrier of the Tao Emperor realm shattered. After that, Xiaochen's cultivation started to rise steadily. After they sensed that Xiaochen had successfully broken through, Xiaoxing's group of 4 withdrew their spirit energy at the first possible moment, and then they slowly opened their eyes while a wisp of faint smiles appeared on the corners of their mouths. We've finally succeeded. Fortunately, Xiaochen's accumulation during these 8 years of time was sufficiently deep, otherwise, it would probably really be difficult for him to break through into the Tao Emperor realm. Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. End of this chapter. Chapter 951. Actually, the actions of Xiaoxing's group of 4 had merely added fuel to the fire. If Xiaochen himself didn't possess the ability to break through to the Tao Emperor realm, then he would definitely be unable to break through successfully as well. Of course, with the cultivations of Xiaoxing's group of 4, it wasn't that they couldn't forcefully improve Xiaochen's cultivation to the Tao Emperor realm. However, doing so wouldn't bring any benefits, and it would even harm Xiaochen. Because if they forcefully improved Xiaochen's cultivation to the Tao Emperor realm, then it would be no different than pulling up a seedling to help it grow. Just as Xiaoxing had said earlier, it would cause irreversible damage to Xiaochen's foundation in the martial Tao. At that time, it would be extremely difficult for Xiaochen to improve further. It was naturally impossible for a holy son like Xiaochen to destroy his future for the sake of a momentary improvement. So, Xiaoxing's group of 4 hadn't forcefully improved Xiaochen's cultivation this time, and they were just going with the flow. If Xiaochen possessed the ability to break through, then Xiaoxing's group of 4 would lend him a hand. On the other hand, if Xiaochen was unable to break through, then they could only give up. Fortunately, Xiaochen didn't disappoint them in the end, and he successfully broke through to the Tao Emperor realm. Xiaoxing's group of 4 were gratified. As for Xiaochen himself, he was slightly excited. The Tao Emperor realm. If it was 100 years ago on the heavenly Qin continent, then he would be an overlord, the king of the entire continent. When Xiaochen had just made a name for himself, the overlord of the Tao Emperor realm was an unreachable existence. However, all along the way, Xiaochen had similarly attained this level. Everything seemed like a dream. Xiaochen had unknowingly attained this level as well, and Xiaochen was merely 100 years old this year. Perhaps 100 years of age could be considered as an extremely old age amongst ordinary people. However, 100 years of age was nothing amongst cultivators. Especially at the Tao Emperor realm, 100 years of age was practically an immature child. After exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, Xiaochen slowly opened his eyes. When he looked at Xiaoxing, the corners of his mouth unconsciously widened into a smile. The Tao Emperor realm. You've finally broken through to the Tao Emperor realm. When he saw Xiaochen grinning like a lotus flower, Xiaoxing scolded angrily with a smile. Brat, don't be so happy. You can stay in the Xiao clan and cultivate in seclusion for the time being. Take it. As he spoke, Xiaoxing tossed a jade bottle to Xiaochen. When Xiaochen opened the jade bottle, he discovered that there were 20 marrow-cleansing pills inside. They did not leave any pills for Xiaochen to increase his cultivation. Xiaosheng and the other three left Xiaochen only marrow-cleansing pills for him to stabilize his cultivation that had just broken through. Xiaochen was not dissatisfied with Xiaosheng and the other three's decision. Subsequently, Xiaosheng and the other three gave Qinshuru and the other two many pills as well. Compared to Xiaochen, the three women obviously received more pills. Not only were there marrow-cleansing pills, but there were also many pills that could increase cultivation. In fact, Qinshuru and the other two women had also received many benefits during the time that Xiaosheng and the other three were here. Now that they had these pills, it was completely enough for the three women to break through to the Tao Master realm in one fell swoop. After accepting the pills from Xiaosheng and the other three, Xiaosheng looked at Xiaochen and said, "Well, we will start to set up the new sect in the next few days. You can stay in the Xiao clan and cultivate well. When the matter of the new sect is settled, I will come back to inform you." The preparations for the establishment of the new sect were almost done. Calculating the time, the people from the Tiana continent should have arrived. Thus, Xiaosheng and the other three began to set up the new sect. Of course, the first step was naturally to choose a site and build the headquarters of the new sect. In this regard, Xiaochen naturally would not take the initiative to ask. What a joke! It was rare for him to be free, so why should he work hard? Anyway, once the new sect was established, Xiaochen could go directly. Wasn't it easy? Xiaosheng and the other three completed their task. On the same day, the four of them left Lingshan Commandery City. Xiaochen, Qinshuru, and the other two women stayed in the Xiao clan. On the second day after Xiaosheng and the other three left, Qinshuru and the other two women went into seclusion at the same time. Xiaochen, who had nothing to do, also began to concentrate on cultivation. Every day, in addition to the usual cultivation, he also refined the marrow-cleansing divine pills. His days were quite fulfilling. He did not care about the establishment of the new sect at all. After all, these things did not require Xiaochen's attention. At the same time, Xiaosheng and the other three ancestors also decided on the location of the new sect. Xiaochen did not know what Xiaosheng and the other three ancestors were thinking. Otherwise, he would have been shocked. This was because Xiaosheng and the other three ancestors did not intend to establish the new sect directly on the Tianqian continent. Instead, they planned to open up a separate pocket dimension on the Tianqian continent. At first glance, it did not seem difficult to open up a separate pocket dimension. At least, it was so for a quasi-sage. However, the pocket dimension that Xiaosheng and the other three ancestors planned to open up this time was much larger. According to the four ancestors' plan, the headquarters of the new sect would be directly established in this separate pocket dimension. Moreover, the cultivation secret realms of the Ancient Saint Sect, Heavenly Saint Sect, Sun Saint Sect, and the Nine Heavens Divine Technique would all be moved to this pocket dimension. From now on, the disciples of the new sect would carry out their daily life in cultivation in the pocket dimension. They would not need to have too much contact with the outside world. Moving the entire new sect into this pocket dimension meant that the area of this pocket dimension would naturally not be small. This would be a test for Xiaosheng and the other three ancestors. The entrance to the pocket dimension was set on the Heavenly Stellar Mountain. This Heavenly Stellar Mountain was the sacred mountain of the Tianqian continent. However, from now on, the peak of this Heavenly Stellar Mountain would be the passage for the new sect to contact the outside world. It could also be regarded as a display of the identity and status of the new sect. Without further ado, Xiaosheng and the other four ancestors began to build the new pocket dimension. The four quasi-sages worked together to create a new pocket dimension on the peak of the Heavenly Stellar Mountain. As for the entrance, it was located on the peak of the Heavenly Stellar Mountain. Xiaosheng and the other three ancestors were busy building the new pocket dimension. At the same time, the first batch of troops from the Tiana continent finally arrived on the Tianqian continent. This time, the number of people who came was obviously greater. More than 10 starships landed on the Tianqian continent. From these starships, more than 100,000 Tiana continent cultivators arrived on the Tianqian continent. These people were naturally very curious about the unfamiliar Tianqian continent, but now they did not have time to play around. Soon, they threw themselves into the establishment of the new sect. The establishment of the new sect was in full swing. Everyone in the heavenly Qin continent knew that perhaps in the near future, there would be a new giant sect in the heavenly Qin continent. It was hard to imagine the scene after the establishment of the new sect, but there was no doubt that the new sect's strength would be formidable. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. End of this chapter. Chapter 952. The establishment of the new sect was in full swing. As the saying goes, many hands pick up firewood, the flame grows taller. With the joint efforts of countless people, the construction of the new sect progressed very quickly. Of course, the most important thing was Xiao Sheng and the other three patriarchs. It was not a simple task for them to build the new small world where the new sect would be located. Fortunately, as the new sect had just been established, they only needed to figure out the general structure first. As for the rest, it would not be a problem to slowly expand it in the future. In order to save time, Xiao Sheng and the other three patriarchs naturally could not build the new small world in one go. They only built a part of it first. Then, many warriors from the Tiana continent and the Tianqian continent entered the small world and began to build palaces and houses. It was obviously impossible to build the entire small world in one go. Therefore, Xiao Sheng and the other three patriarchs cleverly chose to proceed in stages. First, they completed a part of it. After the new sect was established, they would gradually complete the other projects. In the newly constructed small world, hundreds of thousands of future disciples and elders of the new sect were working together to build everything for the new sect. Magnificent buildings rose from the ground in this new small world. At the same time, Xiao Sheng and the other three patriarchs, as well as the saints, used their great magic to move some of the beautiful mountains and rivers from the outside world into this small world. For example, the 9 peaks of the former 9-Cloud Palace, as well as some of the cultivation secret realms where the 7 overlords once resided, were all moved into this small world. Even Tiangong Mountain was moved in as a decoration in this small world. The originally barren small world, with the efforts of everyone, was soon overflowing with vitality and picturesque scenery. It had become an existence similar to an immortal realm. Only a few months had passed. When they entered this small world, they were surrounded by clouds and mist. There were countless strange mountains, strange rocks, and lakes. At the same time, in the center of this small world, there were dozens of mountains that were suspended in the air using the power of talisman formations. These mountain peaks floated in the sky, as if they were the residences of immortals. At the same time, on these mountain peaks, there were lush green trees, birds chirping, and flowers fragrant. Many elegant and simple buildings stood in an intricate manner. These floating mountains were where the new sect was located. In the future, all the disciples and elders of the new sect would live and cultivate on these mountains. From afar, the dozens of mountains looked disorderly, but in fact, they were extremely orderly. The outermost mountains were obviously much smaller, and in the middle, the largest mountain was obviously the center. Around the central mountain, there were a total of 10 slightly smaller mountains floating around, as if they were guarding the central mountain. After a total of half a year, the new sect was finally established. Although there was still a long way to go before it was fully established, it was already enough to meet the requirements for the establishment of the new sect. As for the remaining matters, after the new sect was established, they could slowly perfect it. The initial rewards for the new sect were completed. At the same time, on the dozens of floating mountains, many warriors from the Tiana continent and the Tianqian continent moved in. From now on, this would be their home. It was time to start the establishment of the new sect. Now, almost all of the 7 overlords of the Tianqian continent had been moved into this small world. As for the secret realms of the ancient sacred sect and the 3 sacred sects in the Tiana continent, Xiao Sheng and the others would move all of them into this small world. There was no need for them to worry about this. On this day, on the central mountain, in a magnificent hall, all the saints, as well as Xiao Sheng and the other 3 great ancestors, gathered together and sat on the main seats. Xiao Sheng and the others looked at the saints below. Although not all the saints were present, there were still more than 30 saints gathered in this hall. After glancing at the crowd, Xiao Sheng said slowly, "Everyone, the establishment of the new sect is imminent. With everyone's efforts, the construction of the new sect has been preliminarily completed. We also plan to announce the establishment of the new sect to the public and hold a ceremony for the establishment of the new sect." The first stage of construction had been completed, so it was indeed time to announce the establishment of the new sect. Hearing Xiao Sheng's words, all the saints present nodded with a faint smile on their faces. The establishment of the new sect was expected by everyone, and they had been looking forward to this for a long time by Xiao Sheng. Now, after everyone's efforts, it was finally time for the establishment of the new sect. How could they not be happy? However, just as Xiao Sheng's voice fell, Saint Qing Ju, who had rushed over from the Tiana continent, smiled and said with a slightly excited tone, "Great Ancestor, our new sect hasn't been named yet, right? There has to be a name, right?" All the work for the establishment of the new sect had been completed, but the most important thing was the name. Sure enough, after hearing Saint Qing Ju's words, all the saints' eyes fell on Xiao Sheng and the other 3 great ancestors. When it came to naming the new sect, the only people qualified to do so were naturally Xiao Sheng and the other 3 great ancestors. Now that the 4 of them had broken through to the quasi-saint realm, it was no exaggeration to say that Xiao Sheng and the others were the 4 pillars of the new sect. As long as they were still around, the new sect would not fall. Randang Kozai, who had long thought of this problem, chuckled softly as he faced the gazes of all the saints. "Naturally, we already have a name. This new sect will be called the Sacred Palace." Sacred Palace. Hearing this name, all the saints were slightly taken aback, as if they were muttering these 2 words. Sacred Palace. At first glance, these 2 words sounded very simple, but it revealed everyone's expectations for the new sect. How confident was it to directly use the word saint? Compared to the previous ancient sacred sect, heavenly sacred sect, and sun sacred sect, the 2 words Sacred Palace were undoubtedly much simpler, but at the same time, much more domineering. Sacred Palace was the name Xiao Sheng and the other 3 great ancestors had chosen for the new sect. At the same time, the small world where the Sacred Palace was located would be called the Sacred World in the future. After a moment of silence, all the saints gladly accepted the name Sacred Palace. It was simple but domineering. This was the name that the new sect needed. Now that the name had been decided, the next step was to announce to the world that the Sacred Palace had been established. At the same time, because of the initial establishment of the Sacred Palace, the entire Sacred Palace system had naturally undergone some adjustments. Although it was similar to the previous ancient sacred sect and heavenly sacred sect, there were many differences in many aspects. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 953. With the establishment of the Sacred Palace imminent, Xiaoqian, Qin Shuru, and the others had all arrived at the sacred region. Xiaoqian had been staying in Ridge Mountain City for half a year. Now that the sacred region had been established, as the future first holy son of the Sacred Palace, Xiaoqian naturally had to participate in the Sacred Palace's founding ceremony. Of course, Xiaoqian was accompanied by Xiaoqing, by Ruyue, Qing Yao, Qing Luo, Fei Mei, and the others. It was their first time stepping into the sacred region. With just a glance, Qing Yao, Qing Luo, and the others were completely captivated by the magnificent scenery. Needless to say, the spiritual energy in the sacred region was at least 10 times more abundant than in the outside world. What truly shocked Qing Yao, Qing Luo, and the others was the fairyland-like scenery in the sacred region. Clouds and mist drifted in and out of the shade of the trees. Qing Yao, Qing Luo, and the others couldn't help but exclaim, "What a beautiful place! Is this the small world where the new sect is located? It's so big. It can actually carve out such a huge small world, the girls exclaimed. In fact, they weren't the only ones. Even Xiaochen was a little shocked by the sacred region in front of them. It wasn't hard to imagine that Xiaosheng, the four patriarchs, and the saints had probably put in a lot of effort to build the sacred region. Putting everything else aside, just creating the small world where the sacred region was located wasn't a simple task. Anyway, according to Xiaochen's understanding, a saint definitely couldn't do it. Only a quasi-saint had the ability to do so. It was an immortal-like existence, and this was where Xiaochen and the others would live and cultivate in the future. Accompanying Xiaoqing and Bairuyue, the group soon arrived at the sacred palace and the mountain peaks floating in the sky. He did not allow Xiaoqing and Bairuyue to stay in Lingshan Prefecture City. Instead, he chose to bring them to the sacred palace. Firstly, the cultivation environment in the sacred palace was clearly 100 times better than that of the Xiao residence. Even if the two elders did not do anything here, they would at least be able to extend their lives. After all, there was such rich spiritual energy here. Secondly, the two elders were worried about Xiaochen. Although Xiaochen had completely grown up, Xiaochen was still a child in their eyes. Moreover, the two elders did not want to be separated from their son, so they followed Xiaochen to the sacred palace. Naturally, no one said anything about the arrival of the two elders. With Xiaochen's status, it was normal for him to bring his parents to live in the sacred palace. Just like the saints, they would also bring their families to live in the sacred region. Because the sacred palace was still in its initial stages, there were many things that had yet to be sorted out. However, Xiaochen's cave dwelling had already been completed, so he could bring everyone to move in. After settling down in the sacred palace, Qing Yao, Qing Luo, and Qin Shuru began to decorate the cave dwelling as soon as they entered. This was where everyone would live in the future, so there were many things that needed to be personally arranged by everyone. Xiaochen had no interest in this, so he strolled around the cave dwelling with nothing to do. Around dusk, Chenling and Longqing came to visit. The two of them had also just arrived in the sacred region. The three of them naturally had to have a drink together. Moreover, according to what Xiaochen knew, Chenling and Longqing would become chosen of the sacred palace in the future. This was something that Xiaosheng and the other ancestors had already thought about. With Chenling and Longqing's strength, it would not be very difficult for them to become chosen. Not to mention, the two of them had broken through to the Tao Emperor realm just like Xiaochen, so Xiaochen was a little surprised. One of them was the reincarnation of a great expert, while the other was a pure-blooded dragon. Their cultivation speed was truly shocking. However, compared to the two of them, Xiaochen was probably even more shocking. After all, Xiaochen was just an ordinary human. He did not have any memories of his past life, nor was he a pure-blooded dragon. However, after so many years, Xiaochen's cultivation had not been pulled apart by Chenling and Longqing, and he was still closely behind them. The three siblings reunited and drank until late at night. In the end, Chenling and Longqing directly stayed in Xiaochen's cave dwelling. Following the completion of the sacred region, more and more people surged into the sacred region in the following month. These people were basically the disciples and attendants of the three sacred sects of the Tiana continent. Of course, some of the disciples of the seven overlords of the Tianqian continent were also able to live in the sacred region. They could be considered as the first batch of disciples of the sacred palace. Because the sacred palace already had a strong foundation, the number of people in the sacred palace had already reached a terrifying 200,000 when it had just been completed. 200,000 disciples were only left after the saints had carefully selected and eliminated many people who did not have enough talent. If they had not been selected, the number of people would have probably exceeded 1 million. It was also because of this strict selection that those who were fortunate enough to become the first batch of official disciples of the sacred palace were not weak. They were even much stronger than the ancient sacred sects of the past. These 200,000 people were the first batch of official disciples of the sacred palace. As for the 800,000 people who were eliminated, after another round of selection, 400,000 people stayed and became unofficial disciples of the sacred palace. As for the remaining 400,000, those who did not pass the 2 rounds of selection could only choose to join the outer palace of the Sacred Palace, which was the small sects and clans of the Tiana continent and the Tianshan continent. But now, with the establishment of the Sacred Palace, these clans and sects had been collectively referred to as the Outer Palace of the Sacred Palace. Throughout the Tianshan continent and the Tiana continent, after continuous adjustments and optimizations, the Sacred Palace had a total of 99 outer palaces. The number could be said to be quite large. Moreover, the number of disciples in the outer palace had reached millions. It was simply embarrassing. However, although there were many outer palace disciples, their treatment was obviously not as good as the official disciples of the Sacred Palace. Even the unofficial disciples were far inferior. The reason was very simple. The outer palace disciples were not qualified to enter the sacred region at all. While sorting out the first batch of disciples of the Sacred Palace, the saints were also planning the establishment of the Sacred Palace at the same time. 3 months later, on this day, the Sacred Palace was officially established. Everyone in the Tianshan continent and the Tiana continent congratulated it together. A colossal existence had truly appeared in front of everyone. The world saw the day of the Sacred Palace's establishment. That scene was probably unforgettable for the rest of their lives. There were 4 quasi-saints, a total of 46 saints, and a total of 10 saint sons and saintesses. Below them, there were even more quasi-saints, quasi-saintesses, and half-saints. There were so many that people couldn't even remember them. With such strength, the Sacred Palace was worthy of being the overlord of the 2 continents. All the warriors and forces on the Tianshan continent and the Tiana continent bowed their heads. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. This chapter ends. Chapter 954. It was no exaggeration to say that the establishment of the Sacred Palace represented the arrival of a new era. All the forces of the Tianshan continent and the Tiana continent were vassals of the Sacred Palace and had become its external palaces. For the first time, the sect masters of the various external palaces were fortunate enough to enter the sacred region. Guests and experts gathered on the central peak. The huge main peak was bustling with wine, music, and dancing. Shaoxing's 4 Sacred Palace ancestors, the 9 Heavens Saint and other Sacred Palace saints, as well as Shaoqin and other Sacred Palace chosen and saintesses were all present. Everyone drank and chatted, their hearts filled with hope for the future of the Sacred Palace. In truth, Shaoqin was already very familiar with such banquets and celebrations. However, the scale of the Sacred Palace's founding ceremony this time was much larger than any of the banquets and celebrations that Shaoqin had attended before. Almost all the famous people on the Tiana continent and the Tianshan continent were present. Even Chu Wuming had rushed over from the Tiana continent to participate in the Sacred Palace's founding ceremony. When the banquet was halfway through, ancient sage Randang, who was sitting on the main seat, suddenly said with a chuckle, "You're right. Everyone, in addition to announcing the establishment of the Sacred Palace, today's Sacred Palace ceremony also has an important announcement to make." As soon as Randang Koziai spoke, the crowd quickly quieted down. Although Randang Koziai's voice was very calm and gave off a refreshing feeling, no one dared to be presumptuous in front of him. This was because everyone present knew that Randang Koziai and the other 3 were genuine quasi-saints and could be said to be legendary figures. Now that Randang Koziai said that there was something else to announce, the crowd quieted down. Under the attention of the crowd, Randang Koziai did not keep them in suspense and slowly spoke. As everyone knows, there are a total of 10 Sacred Palace chosen and saintesses. Today, taking advantage of the Sacred Palace ceremony, the Sacred Palace will hold the first Sacred Palace chosen battle to determine the ranking of the 10 Sacred Palace chosen and saintesses. The chosen battle of the Sacred Palace. Upon hearing Randang Koziai's words, everyone present could no longer remain calm and couldn't help but grow excited. To be able to witness a battle between the chosen of the Sacred Palace was definitely a dream come true for everyone. One must know that the 10 chosen of the Sacred Palace had emerged from bloody battles with the demon race. They were genuine young kings who had crawled out from mountains of corpses and seas of blood. The holy sons and holy daughters of the heavenly saint sect, the ancient saint sect, and the Yanxing sect had all died because of the 8 years of fierce battle with the devil clan. Now, only 7 of them were left. Together with the 3 siblings, Xiaochen, Chenling, and Long Qing, they formed the 10 holy sons and holy daughters of the divine palace. No one present could remain calm after witnessing the battle between the 10 chosens and chosens of the sacred palace with their own eyes. Seeing that everyone's emotions had been completely stirred up, Randang Kozai smiled faintly and raised his hand to signal for everyone to calm down. He then said, "Everyone, please calm down for a moment. Before the chosen battle begins, this old man still has something to say. The chosen battle will determine the ranking of the 10 chosens of the sacred palace. However, before it begins, the 4 of us have decided together that the first chosen of the sacred palace will not be determined through a competition. Instead, the position will be directly held by Xiaochen." The chosen battle of the sacred palace was indeed going to be held, but the position of the first chosen had already been reserved. That person was Xiaochen. Following Randang Kozai's words, countless eyes instantly focused on Xiaochen. It was no exaggeration to say that if he became the first chosen of the sacred palace, Xiaochen could be described as having monstrous power in the future. His status would most likely surpass those of the saints. In the face of everyone's gazes, Xiaochen appeared very calm. After all, he already knew about this matter, so at this moment, there was nothing to be shocked about. However, compared to Xiaochen's calmness, the other chosens and saintesses all had different expressions. Qinyu, Emperor Qing, Hu Fei, and Jiangyu did not have any special thoughts other than being a little surprised. However, the remaining 3 chosens and saintesses from the Sky Saint sect and Sun Saint sect appeared very jealous. The 3 of them were naturally dissatisfied that Xiaochen had become the first son of the sacred palace without going through the competition. In their opinion, Xiaochen's strength was not enough to become the first son of the sacred palace. Sure enough, a woman with an icy temperament soon stood up and looked directly at Randang Kozai and the others on the main seats. "Ancestor, since the ranking of the sacred palace chosens is determined through a competition, why is the position of the first chosen directly decided?" This disciple is not convinced. This woman was called Yunchuan, and she came from the Sun Saint sect. She was once the second saintess of the Sun Saint sect. Randang Kozai and the others had clearly expected this when they heard Yunchuan's words. They did not answer and only looked at Xiaochen. Their meaning was very clear: they should solve their own problems by themselves. Xiaochen's position as the first chosen would definitely arouse the displeasure of the other chosens and saintesses. It was precisely because of this that Xiao Sheng and the others helped Xiaochen cleanse his marrow and break through to the Tao Emperor realm. At this moment, Xiaochen stood up helplessly when he saw the gazes of Xiao Sheng and the others. He smiled at Yunchuan and said, "Senior sister Yunchuan, why don't we spar?" If he wanted everyone to acknowledge his position as the first chosen, the simplest way was to rely on strength. So, Xiaochen did not waste his breath and directly challenged Yunchuan. "If you're not convinced, then let's fight." Sure enough, Yunchuan did not even give it a second thought when she heard Xiaochen's words. "Alright, if I lose, I'll acknowledge your position as the first chosen. However, junior brother Xiaochen, if you lose, it means that you don't have the qualifications to become the first chosen of the sacred palace. You don't have any objections to this, right?" "Of course." Xiaochen nodded when he heard Yunchuan's words. The 2 of them agreed to battle. Afterwards, Xiaochen and Yunchuan arrived at the spacious field at the center of the banquet and stood still. The sacred palace had already made preparations for this chosen battle, so they had specially set aside an empty space at the center of the banquet. Moreover, they had even specially inscribed a formation to isolate the aftershocks of the chosen battle. They stood still at the center of the field that had been prepared beforehand. At the same time, the formation activated, and an invisible screen of light quickly enveloped Xiaochen and Yunchuan. The entire process of the battle could be clearly seen from the outside world. However, the aftershocks of the battle were unable to penetrate the formation at all, so they would not disturb the banquet. No one had expected that a chosen would battle so soon. Everyone present held their breaths in concentration as they looked at the two who stood 5 meters apart from each other. They were filled with excitement as they anticipated the start of the battle. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. This chapter ends. Chapter 955. The first chosen battle had begun so soon, and it was being fought by Xiao Chen, who had already been selected as the first chosen, so it could be said that countless people were paying attention to this battle. After all, as the first chosen, Xiao Chen was the leader of the 10 great chosen of the Sacred Palace, and his strength represented the top combat strength of the Sacred Palace's younger generation. To a large extent, one could infer the overall strength of the Sacred Palace's younger generation just by looking at Xiao Chen's combat strength. After all, if even the so-called first chosen's combat strength was mediocre, then the strength of the chosen and even ordinary disciples below him was obvious. If a sheep led a pack of wolves, the wolves would become docile in the end, and if a wolf led a pack of sheep, the sheep would become ferocious in the end. This principle was very simple, and many people understood it. Therefore, everyone present was very much looking forward to the level of combat strength Xiao Chen would display. Both of them were at the Dao Emperor realm, and a Dao Emperor was an emperor in the martial Dao. It was the final step in the martial Dao, and the next step was the half-saint realm. At the half-saint realm, they didn't pursue the martial Dao any longer, and they pursued the even more ethereal Saint Dao. Therefore, the Dao Emperor realm was said to be the end of the martial Dao. Now, the two young Dao Emperor realm experts, Xiao Chen and Yun Chuan, were about to engage in a shocking battle under the gazes of countless people. Xiao Chen looked at Yun Chuan calmly. He knew very well that he had to win this battle beautifully. At the very least, he had to intimidate everyone present. It wasn't just for himself, it was also for the Sacred Palace. He had to let everyone present know that the first chosen of the Sacred Palace wasn't just for show. Senior sister Yun Chuan, come. Xiao Chen lightly exhaled and looked at Yun Chuan as he spoke indifferently. Yun Chuan didn't say anything else when she heard this, and a terrifying aura soared into the sky from her body. Just the eruption of this aura alone was enough to make the expressions of most people present change. One had to know that the people present were all sect leaders of various major forces. They had been famous for many years and could be considered as experts of the older generation. However, after sensing the aura coming from Yun Chuan's body, these old fellows had no choice but to admit that Yun Chuan's strength had already surpassed many of them. Even though Yun Chuan was only at the initial stage of the Dao Emperor realm, it wasn't exaggerated to say that in terms of combat strength, Yun Chuan was absolutely invincible in the Dao Emperor realm unless he encountered a saint or saintess of the same realm. He was already invincible in the Dao Emperor realm at such a young age, and it was even to the extent that he was barely able to fight a half-saint. Moreover, it was practically impossible for a half-saint to kill Yun Chuan. With such strength, how could the expressions of everyone present not change? However, compared to these old fellows, Xiao Chen, who was facing Yun Chuan, appeared to be very calm at this time. There was not the slightest bit of panic in his eyes. Yun Chuan was the first to attack. His figure flashed, and he transformed into 3 afterimages that attacked Xiao Chen from 3 different directions. This was the movement technique that Yun Chuan cultivated, and it was a top-grade heaven-rank movement technique. Once it was executed, it could transform into 3 afterimages. Of course, only the main body possessed offensive strength, and the other 2 afterimages were merely used to confuse the opponent. When facing Yun Chuan's attack, Xiao Chen directly executed the stampede of tiger as well. A tiger's roar resounded, and then a lifelike image of a ferocious tiger slowly floated up into appearance behind Xiao Chen. The stampede of tiger was a high-grade heaven-rank martial technique as well, and it wasn't inferior to Yun Chuan's movement technique. However, the emphasis they placed on it was different. He wasn't confused by Yun Chuan's afterimages, and Yun Chuan obviously didn't expect to defeat Xiao Chen with just these 2 afterimages. Xiao Chen's strength was obvious to all the saints and saintesses. Moreover, in terms of talent, Xiaochen was known as the strongest person. Therefore, it was obviously unrealistic to think that he could confuse Xiaochen with just these simple afterimages. The two of them were extremely fast, and they fought fiercely in the formation. Like Xiaochen, Yunchuan's weapon was also a long sword. The two swords constantly clashed, and terrifying aftershocks were rampant in the formation. Fortunately, the formation was isolated. Otherwise, the aftershocks of the two's battle would definitely affect the people around them. The battle was very intense, but people with discerning eyes could still see that Xiaochen had been defending all this time, and he didn't take the initiative to attack. Compared to Xiaochen, Yunchuan's attacks were very sharp. However, no matter how Yunchuan's attacks surged like a tide, Xiaochen's defense was still impenetrable. In fact, Yunchuan's strength should be at the bottom of the sacred palace's 10 great saints and saintesses. Moreover, their cultivations were similar, so Xiaochen still had a great chance of winning against Yunchuan. After fighting fiercely for a quarter of an hour, Xiaochen finally switched from defense to offense. The ink dragon Jianyi in his hand changed its previous defensive stance, and took the initiative to stab at Yunchuan. After switching from defense to offense, Xiaochen gradually gained the upper hand. At the same time, the tempered battle body, the laws of strength, and the laws of speed were all displayed. Xiaochen quickly gained the upper hand. Under the enhancement of the precepts of force and speed, every strike was not only extremely fast, but also extremely powerful. Therefore, after exchanging a few blows with Xiaochen, Yunchuan felt that his right hand, which was holding the sword, could not help but tremble slightly. The tremendous power made Yunchuan not dare to meet Xiaochen head-on. In this regard, Xiaochen obviously wouldn't give Yunchuan such an opportunity. He firmly entangled Yunchuan, and after a few hundred exchanges, Yunchuan was already at a disadvantage. Yunchuan didn't dare to meet the sword strike head-on, and could only dodge to the side. Seizing this opportunity, Xiaochen directly pointed out with his finger, instantly displaying the shadow-bearing sword finger. The shadow-bearing finger sword was the most powerful attack that Xiaochen had mastered at the moment. Furthermore, after years of training, it had reached the transcendent plane. With a single point, sword light flashed, and attacked Yunchuan like lightning. In the face of Xiaochen's attack, Yunchuan's expression changed. He didn't dare to be careless, and immediately wanted to raise his sword to block. Unfortunately, the power of the shadow-bearing sword finger was too great. The two of them flipped the table, and the long sword in Yunchuan's hand flew out. Without the long sword in his hand, on the other side, before Yunchuan could react, Xiaochen had already arrived. The tip of his sword gently pressed against Yunchuan's throat, leaving only an inch of distance. With the long sword pressed against Yunchuan's throat, Xiaochen said indifferently, "Senior sister Yunchuan, you've lost." After an hour of fierce battle, Xiaochen finally won. Looking at the scene before them, the surrounding people were stunned. It wasn't that they were surprised by Xiaochen's victory, but that the battle between the two of them was really too exciting. A battle of this level wasn't inferior to a fierce battle between two half-saints. Please add it to your collection, monthly vote, recommend it. End of chapter. Chapter 956. The battle between Xiaochen and Yunchuan ended with Xiaochen's victory. This outcome was actually not unexpected for Xiaosheng and the other four ancestors. After all, Yunchuan did not have much of a chance of winning against Xiaochen at the same cultivation level. However, Yunchuan's combat strength was indeed extraordinary. At the very least, she was able to block Xiaochen's strongest attack, the shadow-bearing sword finger. If it was any other Dao Emperor stage expert, even if Xiaochen's shadow-bearing sword finger could not directly kill them, it would definitely be enough to heavily injure them. However, Yunchuan had successfully blocked it and even sent the sword in her hand flying. In fact, she could be said to be completely unharmed. The gap in strength between the 10 great chosen of the sacred palace was not too great. At the very least, it was not easy for Xiaochen to defeat Yunchuan. Moreover, this was merely an ordinary spar. If it was a battle of life and death, even if Xiaochen could defeat Yunchuan, it would probably be even more troublesome to kill her. It was even possible that Yunchuan would escape. After the battle with Yunchuan, Xiaochen secretly estimated that if he wanted to kill Yunchuan, he would only have a 70% chance of success. Moreover, he would have to go all out. As soon as Xiaochen finished speaking, Yunchuan was not a sore loser. She nodded and revealed a faint smile on her face as she said, "Junior brother Xiao is indeed someone who has changed after 3 days. I admit defeat." She very calmly admitted her defeat. Seeing this, Xiaochen took the initiative to sheath his sword and said with a smile, "Senior sister Yunchuan, thank you for letting me win." The result had already been decided. Following this, no one continued to insist on Xiaochen's position as the first chosen saint. Of course, people like Chen Yu, Chen Ling, and Long Qing naturally wouldn't challenge Xiaochen. As for the remaining people, after witnessing the battle between Xiaochen and Yunchuan, they also let go of the dissatisfaction in their hearts and acknowledged Xiaochen's strength. After all, Xiaochen had been reputed to have the strongest natural talent amongst all the holy sons and holy virgins on the heavenly river continent. At that time, Xiaochen's only shortcoming was his cultivation. After all, Xiaochen was young, and there was still a gap between his cultivation and theirs. But now, Xiaochen had broken through to the Dao Emperor realm, and the gap between their cultivations had been closed. Once the gap between their cultivations wasn't too great, there was naturally no need to doubt Xiaochen's strength. With the joint recommendation of the 4 ancestors and Xiaochen's various performances on the heavenly river continent, the position of the first chosen saint was taken by Xiaochen without much resistance. The first chosen saint of the sacred palace had been confirmed, and it was Xiaochen. Next, the chosen saint ranking battle would officially begin. In fact, the rules of the chosen saint ranking battle were simple. First, the second chosen saint would be determined. Anyone who felt that they could become the second chosen saint could enter the arena and accept the challenges of the other holy sons and holy virgins. The person who remained on the arena in the end would become the second chosen saint. The rules of the chosen saint ranking battle were very simple and crude. As the ranking battle officially began, Chen Ling, who was sitting beside Xiaochen, was the first to stand up and say, "I'll go first." As he spoke, Chen Ling slowly walked into the array and waited for the other holy sons and holy virgins to challenge him. Chen Ling was the first to stand up and compete for the position of the second chosen saint. Soon, a handsome young man stood up. This person was called Bai, and he was once the first chosen saint of the Sky Saint sect. Him entering the arena now meant that he also wanted the position of the second chosen saint. The first battle of the chosen saint ranking battle was between Chen Ling and Bai. The holy sons were no strangers to Bai. After all, he was already the first chosen of the Sky Saint sect. On the other hand, to be honest, the holy sons did not know much about Chen Ling. In the array, Chen Ling and Bai stood facing each other. Bai slowly opened his mouth and said, "Brother Chen Ling, actually, I've always been very interested in you." "Oh? That would be my honor." Hearing this, Chen Ling lightly smiled as he replied, "I've seen you fight with the demon race's demon son, so I know that you're very strong. I've wanted to fight with you for a long time. It seems that today is the best opportunity," Bai said indifferently. In the war with the demon race, Bai had seen the battle between Chen Ling and the demon race's demon son. Since then, Bai had always been very interested in Chen Ling. As he spoke, a terrifying aura erupted from Bai's body. This aura was slightly stronger than Yunchuan's from before. Clearly, Bai was stronger than Yunchuan. Bai took the lead. Following Bai's attack, the Sacred Palace's chosen saint ranking battle officially began. Bai and Chen Ling immediately clashed. Looking at the two people fighting fiercely in the array, Xiaochen could remember that this was the first time Chen Ling had displayed his strength in front of so many people. Although Xiaochen had always known that Chen Ling was very strong, in the eyes of outsiders, Chen Ling was a very mysterious person who rarely fought in front of everyone. It was also because of this that the crowd began to discuss Chen Ling when they saw that Bai and Chen Ling were locked in battle. After all, Bai was once the first chosen of the Sky Saint sect, and now, Qianling was actually able to fight him to a standstill. The battle lasted for a full 8 hours before a victor was finally decided. Qianling's skills were better and he won. After the end of the first battle, Qianling was given 4 hours to rest. After 4 hours, the other Holy Sons could continue their challenges. However, what no one expected was that after Qianling defeated Bai, no one continued to challenge him. Qinyu had no intention of challenging him at all. In the end, Qianling successfully took the position of the second chosen. The chosen saint ranking battle lasted for a full 4 days. For the people present, 4 days without sleep was no longer a problem for them at their cultivation level. Therefore, everyone present watched the chosen's ranking battle with great interest. Even after the last battle of the chosen's ranking battle ended, they still hadn't recovered from their shock. After 4 days of intense battles, the 10 chosen of the sacred palace were finally ranked. First chosen, Xiaochen. Second chosen, Qianling. Third chosen, Longqing. Fourth chosen, Qinyu. Fifth chosen, Emperor Qing. Sixth chosen, Bai. Seventh chosen, Quanlan. Eighth chosen, Hu Fei. Ninth chosen, Yunchuan. 10th chosen, Jiangyu. These were the final rankings of the 10 chosen of the sacred palace after 4 days of intense battles. It was no exaggeration to say that these 4 days were a visual feast for everyone present. Moreover, the sacred palace had also shown everyone a little of the sacred palace's strength through the chosen saint ranking battle. Any one of the 10 chosen could beat up cultivators of the same cultivation level. Moreover, even the weakest, the 10th chosen, Jiangyu, had the strength to fight against the half-saint. Of course, for the saints and saintesses, combat strength was secondary. The most important thing was their potential, which was what made people fear them the most. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 957. In these 4 days, the 10 chosens of the sacred palace had shown everyone the strength of the sacred palace. Xiao Sheng and the other patriarchs were naturally happy to see this. They believed that after this ceremony, the sacred palace's position in the hearts of these people would become unshakable. In the future, as long as the sacred palace did not fall, all forces on the heavenly Qin continent and the Tiana continent could only bow their heads to it. With the end of the Chosen's ranking battle, the rankings of the 10 Chosens were finally determined. Of course, there were still some surprises. First of all, Qinyu was only ranked 4th in the Chosen's ranking battle, behind Xiaochen, Qianling, and Longqing. Originally, everyone thought that with Qinyu's strength, there should be no problem for him to be ranked 2nd. However, Qinyu did not seem to be interested in the Chosen's ranking battle, so he did not choose to challenge Qianling and Longqing at all. Even the position of 4th Chosens could be said to be beyond Qinyu's ability. Other than Qinyu, there was also Bai. In the Holy Sun ranking battle this time, Bai was only ranked 6th. This was something that no one had expected. As the former first chosen of the Heavenly Saint sect, Bai had actually lost to Emperor Qing in the competition for the 5th chosen position. Unknowingly, Emperor Qing's strength had surpassed Bai, which was also a result that no one had expected. Of course, other than these two things that were more surprising, the rest could be considered as expected. However, it was undeniable that the 10 chosens of the sacred palace were indeed ridiculously strong. In fact, this was mostly due to the war with the demon race. It was precisely because of the 8 years of bloody war with the demon race that Xiao Chen and the others could be said to have completed a complete transformation. Of the chosens of the Tiana continent, only the 10 of them had survived. As such, they had climbed out from a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, and their strength was naturally far greater than before. With the end of the Chosen's ranking battle, the Sacred Palace's founding ceremony was also announced. The various sect masters of the outer palaces also left one after another. As the sect masters of the outer palaces of the Sacred Palace, they did not have the qualifications to live in the holy region, so they naturally had to leave after the ceremony ended. With the departure of the sect masters of the outer palaces, the holy region quickly quieted down. The next step was to establish the sacred palaces system. According to the expectations of Shaosheng and the other 4 patriarchs, the sacred palace had the positions of patriarch, saint, elders, and deacons. At the same time, the disciples would be chosens, saintesses, prospective chosens, direct disciples, core, ordinary, and in-name disciples. Among them, there was no need to mention the patriarch. Shaosheng and the other 3 were the strongest in the sacred palace. At the same time, they were also the highest leaders in charge of everything in the sacred palace. Unlike the ancient sacred sect and heavenly sacred sect, the saints no longer held the position of elder in the sacred palace. Instead, they were saint venerables. Like the patriarchs, they did not participate in the daily management of the sacred palace and focused all their attention on cultivation. Unless something major happened, the saint venerables and patriarchs would not easily show their faces. This was the main task of the patriarchs and saint venerables. They were the pillars of the sacred palace and ensured that the sacred palace would prosper forever. On the other hand, the elders below them were half-saints, and the officers were Tao Emperor realm experts. At the same time, the sacred palace established the 10 sacred palaces, with the 10 chosens and saintesses as palace masters. All the rules in the 10 sacred palaces were set by the chosens and saintesses themselves. At the same time, the elders and half-saints of the sacred palace would belong to different sacred palaces and listen to the orders of their respective palace masters. Of course, in addition to the 10 sacred palaces, the sacred palace also established the mission hall, martial skills hall, and various cultivation secret realms. These were all managed by the saint venerables. Of course, the saint venerables would not show their faces. They just had to follow the rules. Apart from the above, the prospective chosens, prospective saintesses, direct disciples, core disciples, and ordinary disciples were not much different from the ancient sacred sect and heavenly sacred sect. The only thing worth mentioning was the nominal disciples. This was something the ancient sacred sect and heavenly sacred sect did not have. These nominal disciples were existences between the inner and outer palace disciples. Their talent was inferior to the inner palace disciples, but they were stronger than the outer palace disciples. Therefore, these nominal disciples could live and cultivate in the sacred region, but they were not qualified to enter the sacred mountains. The so-called sacred mountains were the dozens of mountains floating in the sky where the sacred palace was located. They were not qualified to enter the sacred mountains. Shaosheng and the other patriarchs had specially built a small city for them in the sacred region. These nominal disciples lived and cultivated in this small city until they became true inner palace disciples one day. At that time, they would be able to enter the sacred mountains. The entire system of the sacred palace was read out to everyone. Compared to the ancient sacred sect and heavenly sacred sect, the new system of the sacred palace was undoubtedly more distinct. The treatment that disciples of each level could receive was very different. The 10 chosens and saintesses had undoubtedly become the most powerful people in the sacred palace. This was because the patriarchs and sacred venerables were basically in charge. Therefore, in the entire sacred palace, the 10 chosens and saintesses had the final say. A handbook about the sacred palace had been issued to every disciple. The next day, Shaosheng and the other patriarchs also called Shaochen and the other chosens and saintesses to the main hall of the central peak. Now that the chosens' ranking battle was over and the rankings of the chosens and saintesses had been confirmed, the next 10 halls were up to them to establish themselves. Once the 10 halls were established, the current sacred palace disciples would have to choose a different sacred palace to join. In the main hall, Shaosheng and the other 3 patriarchs sat on the main seats while Shaochen and the other 5 patriarchs stood side by side. Shaosheng chuckled as he looked at the 10 of them. The establishment of the 10 sacred palaces will be up to you. Apart from the rules and regulations of the sacred palace, you can make your own decisions regarding the rules of the 10 sacred palaces. I believe that such a small matter will not be difficult for you. Shaochen and the others were fully in charge of the 10 sacred palaces, including the rules and regulations of the 10 sacred palaces. This also meant that from now on, the rules and regulations of each sacred palace would be different. This was because the rules of each sacred palace would be decided by the chosens and saintesses of each sacred palace. Naturally, there would be differences. Xiao Chen and the others nodded in agreement when they heard Xiao Sheng's words. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 958. Xiao Chen and the others left the hall and headed to their respective main peaks. The idea behind the construction of the sacred palace was very simple. The central peak was naturally where Xiao Sheng, the four ancestors, and the saints resided. At the same time, it was the most central location of the entire sacred palace, and it was the largest. 10 slightly smaller peaks floated around the central peak. These 4 peaks were the main peaks of the 10 sacred halls, and 90 smaller peaks floated around the main peaks of the 10 sacred halls. These 90 peaks belonged to different sacred halls. Every single main peak was surrounded by 9 similar peaks, and these peaks were where the disciples would live in the future. The central peak was where the ancestors and heavenly venerables resided, whereas the main peak was where the chosen, and elders resided. As for the personal disciples, core disciples, and ordinary disciples below them, they naturally resided on the 90 smaller peaks. They returned to the main peaks that belonged to them. None of the peaks had been named yet. Naturally, it was up to the chosen and saintesses to name them. After all, they would be the masters of the 10 sacred palaces in the future. Even the half-saint elders would have to obey the orders of the chosen and saintesses. Xiao Chen went straight back to his residence, which was located at the top of the main peak of the Sage Hall. He sat in the backyard with Qin Shuru and the others, and they discussed the matter of establishing the sacred halls. The 4 ancestors had only given them 3 days. They had to complete the construction of the sacred halls within 3 days, and then the disciples would be divided into different sacred halls. According to Xiao Sheng, every single sacred hall would have 20 half-saint elders, 50 Dao Emperor attendants, 10 chosen and chosen saints, 200 personal disciples, and countless core and ordinary disciples. However, based on the current situation, every single sacred hall had to have at least 20,000 disciples. Actually, there wasn't much that needed to be done with the construction of the sacred halls. The construction had been completed a long time ago, and all that was left was for Xiao Chen and the other chosen to name their respective sacred halls and determine the rules and regulations. Only then would the 10 sacred halls be established. Xiao Chen was too lazy to think about the name of his temple. He directly decided to call it the Dustless Temple. The temple that belonged to Xiao Chen was named Wuchen Temple. As for the rules and regulations of Wuchen Temple, Xiao Chen directly threw them to Qin Shuru and the other 2 women. Anyway, Xiao Chen had no interest in these trivial matters. Xiao Chen didn't care about anything else other than naming the divine temple. On the next day, the 20 half-saint elders and 50 Dao Emperor realm attendants that the 4 ancestors had sent to Wuchen Divine Hall arrived at Wuchen Divine Hall. These people would become Xiao Chen's right-hand men in the future, assisting Xiao Chen in managing everything in the Unsullied Temple. Xiao Chen wasn't too excited by their arrival. Even though the 20 half-saints and 50 Dao Emperor realm experts would obey his orders from now on, Xiao Chen still wasn't too excited. Residences were arranged for everyone on Dustless Sacred Peak. The saints had expended a great deal of effort in the construction of the sacred palace this time. It wasn't just Xiao Chen and the other saints, even the prospective saints, half-saint elders, and Dao Emperor realm attendants had their own residences. There were an entire few tens of residences on Wuchen Peak, and they stretched from the middle of the mountain all the way to the top. Of course, the residence at the top belonged to Xiao Chen. 3 days later, Xiao Chen and the other chosen had finished dealing with the matters of the 10 sacred halls. At the same time, the numerous disciples of the sacred palace had joined the various sacred halls. Every sacred hall had 20,000 disciples. When the disciples were choosing their sacred halls, the Wuchen sacred hall that belonged to Xiao Chen was clearly the most popular. As for the prodigies of the heavenly Qin continent like Guduwuya, Huangfu Ao, and the others, their first choice was naturally the Wuchen Sacred Hall. After so many years of tempering, Gudu Wuya and the others' improvement was far inferior to Xiao Chen. Not to mention Xiao Chen, even Qin Shuru and the other two girls were far inferior. However, Gudu Wuya and the others had all become chosen of the sacred palace, and their strength was much stronger than before. The disciples didn't hesitate to choose the sacred hall they liked. After they chose their sacred halls, their attire in the future would have the symbol of their respective sacred halls. For example, the disciples of Wuchen's sacred hall had a small golden sword embroidered on their chest, indicating that they were disciples of the sacred palace of Wuchen's sacred hall. After the 10 sacred halls were completed, the disciples successively joined them. Xiao Chen's Wuchen Sacred Hall, Chen Ling's Lingyun Sacred Hall, Long Qing's 10,000 Dragon Sacred Hall, Chen Yu's Ethereal Sacred Hall, Qing Emperor's Imperial Sacred Hall, Baiyi's Heavenly White Sacred Hall, Quan Lan's Quanlan Sacred Hall, Hu Fei's 100 Battle Shrines, Yunchuan's Flowing Rain Sacred Hall, Jian Yu's Mountain Sacred Hall. The 10 sacred halls became the sacred palace's autonomy. At the same time, with the completion of the 10 sacred halls, the sacred palace gradually became more precious. Xiao Sheng and the other 3 ancestors also personally set off to the Tiana continent to move the cultivation mystic realms of the ancient sacred sect, heavenly sacred sect, and sun sacred sect into the sacred region. Everything in the sacred palace was progressing in a good direction. However, no one knew that on a continent far away from the Tianqian continent, there was a continuous mountain range. In the depths of the mountain range, which should have been deserted, there was a cluster of buildings. This was the location of the Fallen River Sacred Sect. No one on the Tianqian continent had heard of the Fallen River Sacred Sect. However, on the way to the Tianqian continent, Xiao Chen and the others saved a sacred son of the Fallen River Sacred Sect named Wang Luo. Wang Luo was the only son of the sect master of the Fallen River Sacred Sect. Perhaps Xiao Chen and the others had forgotten about Wang Luo and the Fallen River Sacred Sect, but Wang Luo hadn't. To be precise, he hadn't forgotten about 100 Flower Fairy. After such a long time, Wang Luo had already sent people to inquire about 100 Flower Fairy. At this moment, in a beautiful cave residence, Wang Luo was sitting in the main hall. He looked at the 4 middle-aged men below him and asked in a low voice, "What? You still haven't found the beauty I'm looking for?" Hearing Wang Luo's words, one of them respectfully replied, "Young sect master, please calm down. We have tried our best to find her. We have searched all the continents in the starry sky, including the Blood Demon Continent, the Tiana Continent, and the recently discovered Northern Demon Continent. We have sent people to look for her, but we haven't found any clues." Wang Luo was very annoyed that they still hadn't found 100 Flower Fairies' whereabouts. Just as he was about to scold them, another middle-aged man spoke first. "Young sect master, we have sent people to the Tiana continent and the other 2 continents. However, there is still one continent that we haven't searched." "Oh? Where is it?" "The Tianqian continent. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 959. There were only 4 continents in the starry sky where he met Flower Fairy: the Tiana continent, the Northern Demon Continent, the Blood Demon Continent, and the Tianqian continent. Other than the Tianqian continent, the Falling River Saint sect had sent people to the other 3 continents with Flower Fairy's portrait, but there was still no news of her. It was hard to imagine that Flower Fairy, whom Wang Luo had only met once, would be so unforgettable. When he heard that there was still a Tianqian continent that had not been searched, Wang Luo stood up and said without hesitation, "Okay, such a beauty must be on the Tianqian continent. This time, I will go personally." Although they had only met once, 100 Flower Fairy had already left an indelible impression in Wang Luo's heart. In Wang Luo's heart, he had to obtain 100 Flower Fairy no matter what. If he could obtain such a beauty, Wang Luo would not hesitate to use any means. Seeing that Wang Luo planned to go personally to the Tianqian continent, the 3 experts of the Falling River Saint sect were not surprised. During this period, ever since Wang Luo returned to the Falling River Saint sect, it was as if he had been bewitched. His heart was always with Flower Fairy, and from time to time, he would stare at Flower Fairy's portrait in a daze. His face was full of infatuation, as if his soul had been taken away. This portrait of Flower Fairy was based on Wang Luo's memory and was made by the best artist in the Falling River Saint sect. It looked very lifelike, and through the portrait, the experts of the Falling River Saint sect knew that Flower Fairy was indeed indescribably beautiful. As the young sect leader of the Fallen River Saint sect, Wang Luo could be said to have gotten whatever he wanted since he was young. Of course, he was also considered to have lived up to expectations. His talent was not bad, so he became the holy son of the Fallen River Saint sect. However, due to his noble status, Wang Luo's personality was obviously somewhat arrogant and domineering. As long as he wanted something, there was nothing he could not get. Therefore, this time, he had his eyes on Flower Fairy. This was the first time Wang Luo had been so obsessed with a woman, so no matter what, Wang Luo must obtain Flower Fairy. 3 days later, Wang Luo left the Falling River Saint sect accompanied by the experts of the Falling River Saint sect. They boarded a starship and headed straight to the Tianqian continent. This time, Wang Luo brought along 2 saints of the Falling River Saint sect. He didn't take the Heavenly Qin continent seriously. After all, the Heavenly Qin continent was just a small continent. The Fallen River Holy Sect was a powerful saint-level family. There were no less than 15 Saint Realm experts in the sect. They were very powerful. However, Wang Luo did not expect that his trip to the Heavenly Qin continent would not only cost him his life, but also the Fallen River Saint sect that had been passed down for thousands of years. This was because the Tianqian continent now had the Sacred Palace, and the Sacred Palace was a quasi-saint clan. It was on a completely different level from the Falling River Saint sect. Wang Luo did not know this until now. He was very interested in the Tianqian continent. At the same time, in the sacred region of the Tianqian continent, the 10 Saints Temple had been completed. All the disciples had joined the 10 Saints Temple, and Xiao Qin and the other saints and saintesses had received Holy Sun robes personally made by Xiao Sheng and the other patriarchs. The golden robes were very wide, and the bottom reached the ankles. There was a huge saint word on the back. This was the Holy Sun robes that Xiao Sheng and the other patriarchs had specially designed for the 10 saints and saintesses of the Sacred Palace. Not only was it a symbol of status, but it was also a very good defensive treasure that had reached the top of the saint level. The Holy Sun robes were personally made by the patriarchs, and the many disciples below had received brand new Sacred Palace disciple robes according to their different positions. Not only the disciples, but the elders, deacons, and saint venerables also received their own Sacred Palace robes. Under the operation of the 10 Saints Temple, the Sacred Palace was gradually on the right track, and the disciples slowly adapted to life in the Sacred Palace. At the same time, Xiao Sheng and the other patriarchs had moved all the cultivation mystic realms of the ancient Saint sect, the Heavenly Saint sect, and the Sun Saint sect from the Tiana continent into the sacred region. Now, in the sacred region, it could be said that all the cultivation holy lands of the Tiana continent and the Tianqian continent had been gathered. The cultivation environment was simply incredible. With such a good cultivation environment and a large number of cultivation mystic realms, the disciples of the Sacred Palace believed that there would soon be a period of explosive growth, and everyone's strength would be able to make a qualitative leap. While continuing to develop the sacred region, Xiao Sheng and the other patriarchs were also preparing to send people to the Blood Demon continent to completely exterminate the demonic cultivators, so that they would not have the slightest chance to counterattack. This time, the expedition to the Blood Demon continent was led by Prime Saint Ice Lotus, and at the same time, 10 saints accompanied her. Moreover, among the 10 saints' temples, Jianyu's Mountain Temple and Yunchuan's Rainwater Temple would be involved. The 2 holy temples' disciples were in charge of attacking the Blood Demon continent. This was the ancestors' decision. Without wasting any time, Prime Saint Ice Lotus led the disciples of the 2 holy temples and 10 holy sovereigns to leave the Heavenly Star continent and head towards the Blood Demon continent. only the Mountain Temple and Rainwater Temple of the 10 Saints temples had received the order to attack the Blood Demon continent. Regarding this, the saints and saintesses of the other 7 temples would inevitably have some small complaints. On this day, Xiaochen was originally cultivating in his cave when the Qing Emperor, Qin Yu, and Hu Fei came looking for him. Sitting in a circle in the garden, Hu Fei, who was a battle maniac, said unhappily as soon as he arrived. "Damn it, if Jiang Yu can lead people to attack the Blood Demon Temple, why can't my Temple of 100 Battles go as well?" Hu Fei said angrily. Previously, he had personally gone to find the 4 patriarchs and wanted to lead people from the Temple of 100 Battles to the Blood Demon continent. Unfortunately, he was rejected by the patriarchs. After all, the Blood Demon continent could be said to be basically crippled. Moreover, with Prime Saint Ice Lotus leading the team this time, the 2 temples were actually more than enough. Hu Fei's Temple of 100 Battles did not need to participate. Hu Fei was naturally unhappy that he did not get the opportunity to attack the Blood Demon continent. Hearing this, Xiaochen could only smile helplessly. "Senior brother Hu Fei, good things have to be used on the edge of the blade. If the Sacred Palace still needs to go all out against the Blood Demon continent, wouldn't it be a joke? Don't worry, this battle will be fought by you in the future." Xiaochen knew Hu Fei too well. As soon as Xiaochen finished speaking, a half-step Saint Elder of the Wuchen Temple hurriedly ran in. He did not even have time to salute Xiaochen. "Saint, an unidentified starship has arrived at the Tianqian continent. It seems like it wants to land on the Tianqian continent. The Saint Venerables have asked the Wuchen Temple to send people to take a look. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 960. A starship landed on the heavenly Qin continent. Upon hearing the elder's words, Xiaochen pondered for a moment before replying indifferently, "Then you can arrange for someone to go." He didn't care too much about this matter. After all, the heavenly Qin continent was no longer a continent that had no contact with the outside world. To be honest, the establishment of the Sacred Palace meant that they would have to deal with other continents in the future. Therefore, Xiaochen directly put the half-saint elder in charge of this matter. However, Xiaochen clearly didn't expect that this starship would come from the Fallen River Saint sect. Wang Luo was also on this starship. It had to be said that this guy had traveled thousands of miles to deliver his head on a silver platter. Upon hearing Xiaochen's words, the half-saint elder nodded in response and immediately arranged for someone to check the starship. The Sacred Palace didn't have any hostility towards this starship that had suddenly landed. If it were cultivators from other continents, the Sacred Palace wouldn't recommend playing host to them. Qin Yu and the other 2 didn't say much about Xiaochen's arrangements. After all, this was the Dustless Temple's matter and they didn't have the authority to command Xiaochen. Xiaochen stopped thinking about this matter and continued to chat with Qin Yu and the other 2. Of course, the main topic was Hu Fei's complaint. The trip to the Blood Demon continent this time had excluded him from the Temple of 100 Battles, which made Hu Fei very unhappy. While Xiaochen and the others were chatting, the starship from the Fallen River Saint sect directly landed on the heavenly Qin continent. At the same time, the half-saint elder that Xiaochen had met before also appeared above the starship with a few disciples of the Dustless Temple. As Wang Luo and the other experts of the Fallen River Saint sect arrived on the deck, the half-saint elder from the Dustless Temple slowly descended and cupped his hands towards Wang Luo and the others in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. "I am an elder of the Divine Palace's Dustless Temple. May I ask where you are from?" Since he didn't know the identity and purpose of Wang Luo and the others, the elder's tone was still calm. Hearing this, Wang Luo was obviously used to being arrogant and didn't return the greeting. He even snorted and said, "It's none of your business." Wang Luo completely ignored the elder. Hearing Wang Luo's words, the elder's face darkened. Fortunately, a young man beside Wang Luo smiled and said, "Holy Son, this person looks like a native of the heavenly Qin continent. Since we're here to look for someone, why don't you show him the portrait? Maybe he knows something." He guessed that this elder was a native of the heavenly Qin continent. Hearing this, Wang Luo immediately smiled and said, that's right. After being reminded by the young man, Wang Luo quickly took out the portrait of 100-Flower Fairy from his storage ring, looked at the elder, and asked as if it was an order. "Let me ask you, have you seen the woman in this painting?" Wang Luo's attitude made the elder very unhappy. However, when he saw the woman in the painting, the elder was stunned. Wasn't this the wife of the Holy Sun Xiaochen, the Holy Sun, 100-Flower Fairy? Why would Wang Luo have her portrait? The elder was a little stunned. Looking at his expression, Wang Luo was not a fool and quickly guessed that this elder must know 100-Flower Fairy. After searching for so long, he finally had some clues today. Wang Luo was overjoyed and immediately shouted to the two saints of the Fallen River Holy Sect behind him. "Take him down." Since this elder knew 100-Flower Fairy, there was nothing more to say. Take him down and then slowly interrogate him. Wang Luo's style of doing things was very domineering. Of course, as the young sect master of the Fallen River Holy Sect, he was qualified to do so. Even the other holy sons and holy daughters of the Fallen River Holy Sect didn't dare to be too presumptuous in front of Wang Luo. There was no other way, who asked him to have a good background. However, Wang Luo clearly didn't expect that this was the heavenly Qin continent, where the sacred palace was located, and not his Fallen River Holy Sect. Therefore, when he heard Wang Luo's words, the half-step Saint Elder's face darkened. Without hesitation, he directly used a voice transmission talisman and sent the entire matter back to the dustless sacred hall. He had already seen that the two middle-aged men standing behind Wang Luo were Saint Realm experts, so the elder wasn't stupid enough to fight them head-on. Instead, he immediately sent the news back to the sacred palace. Xiaochen, who was in the dustless sacred hall, was chatting with Cheng Yu and the other two when he suddenly received the elder's message. Noticing the change in Xiaochen's expression, Cheng Yu and the other two asked, "What happened? What's wrong?" There was no need to hide it from the three of them, so Xiaochen directly told them about Wang Luo. Hearing this, Hu Fei was the first to stand up and shout. "Which force is this person from? How dare he be so arrogant? Junior brother Xiaochen, let's go and take a look." Hu Fei, who was already suppressing his anger, naturally couldn't hold it in when he heard that Wang Luo was so ignorant. Seeing this, Xiaochen didn't stop Hu Fei this time. The four of them planned to take a look together, but before they left, the four of them ran into Qin Shuru and the other two girls. When they heard that someone was causing trouble on the heavenly Qin continent, Gu Lingyao immediately expressed that she wanted to go with them. In the end, Xiaochen had no choice but to bring the three girls along. In the elder's voice transmission, he also told Xiaochen that there was a saint in Wang Luo's group. Therefore, when Xiaochen left the dustless sacred hall, he also ordered people to inform the saint sovereigns of this matter. They left the sacred region directly. As the distance wasn't far, Xiaochen and the others soon arrived above Wang Luo's spaceship. However, when they appeared, they immediately saw that the dustless sacred hall elder and a few other disciples had been forcefully captured by Wang Luo. At this time, on the deck of the starship, Wang Luo was sitting in his seat, while the elder's cultivation was sealed and he was being interrogated by Wang Luo. Looking at the miserable appearance of the elder, it was obvious that he had been beaten up. Seeing this, Xiaochen and the others' faces darkened. However, Chen Yu was the first to notice Wang Luo. Looking at Wang Luo, Chen Yu helplessly smiled bitterly. "Junior brother Xiaochen, I'm afraid he's here to make trouble for you." Xiaochen still didn't remember who Wang Luo was. Chen Yu pointed at Wang Luo and asked, "Senior brother Chen Yu, why do you say that? Junior brother, you really don't remember him?" With Chen Yu's reminder, Xiaochen finally remembered who Wang Luo was this time. At the same time, Wang Luo and the others also noticed Xiaochen and the others standing in the air. When they looked up, Wang Luo immediately saw 100-Flower Fairy standing beside Xiaochen. He immediately stood up and looked at 100-Flower Fairy in surprise. "Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 961. With Chen Yu's reminder, Xiaochen finally remembered who Wang Luo was. He did not expect that Wang Luo, whom he had accidentally saved in space, would chase them all the way to Tianqian continent. Xiao Chen's eyes flashed coldly. From the way Wang Luo looked at Flower Fairy, how could Xiao Chen not know his intentions? It was obvious that he had chased Flower Fairy all the way here. Xiao Chen had guessed everything, and so did Qin Yu and the others. As for the three women, Qin Shuru's expression was cold and murderous. It was obvious that Wang Luo's actions had made Qin Shuru very unhappy. The three women were not only Xiao Chen's chess pieces, but they were also his brothers in love. Now that Wang Luo had the audacity to chase Flower Fairy all the way to Tianqian continent, how could Qin Shuru not be angry? Like Qin Shuru, Flower Fairy's expression was also cold. However, she also secretly observed Xiao Chen's expression. Seeing that Xiao Chen was fine, she was relieved. Just as Xiao Chen and the others guessed Wang Luo's intentions, Wang Luo led the people of the Fallen River Holy Sect into the air. They were protected by two saints of the Fallen River Holy Sect. Flying in front of Xiao Chen and the others, Wang Luo ignored them all and only had eyes for Flower Fairy. She was still as beautiful as ever. No wonder Wang Luo dreamed of her. Wang Luo said to Flower Fairy with what he thought was a gentle smile on his face. "Beauty, you really made it difficult for me to find you." Indeed, in order to find Flower Fairy, Wang Luo had spent a lot of effort. However, seeing the goddess of his dreams again, Wang Luo felt that all his efforts were worth it. However, in response to Wang Luo's words, Flower Fairy coldly replied, "As the saying goes, there is a way to solve a disaster, but there is no escape from a disaster brought on by oneself." Originally, Wang Luo was just a passerby to Xiao Chen. But now that he had chased him all the way to the heavenly Qin continent, Xiao Chen had no reason to let him go. Although they could tell that there were two saints standing on either side of Wang Luo, it didn't matter. This was the heavenly Qin continent, the headquarters of the sacred palace. Even if a quasi-saint came here, Xiao Shen's group of four wouldn't be able to kill them, let alone two saints. Even if they couldn't kill them, they could only end up fleeing in panic. So, Xiao Chen didn't take Wang Luo and the other two saints seriously at all. As for the other disciples and elders of the Fallen River Saint sect, they were like ants to him. Seeing how infatuated Wang Luo was with the 100-Flower Fairy, Xiao Chen was too lazy to say anything more. He directly used a sound transmission talisman and told Xiao Sheng what had happened here. Since Wang Luo dared to chase them all the way to the heavenly Qin continent, Xiao Chen dared to make him stay here forever, regardless of his identity. In this starry sky, there might be many sacred sects, but there were definitely not many quasi-saint sections. Moreover, the sacred palace had 4 quasi-saints, so they had the confidence to not fear anyone. He directly told Xiao Sheng what had happened through the sound transmission talisman. Wang Luo didn't stop Xiao Chen's actions. Perhaps in his opinion, Xiao Chen couldn't make any waves at all, or perhaps he thought that the Fallen River Saint sect was strong enough, at least in this small heavenly Qin continent. With only the 100-Flower Fairy in his eyes, Hu Fei, who was the most impulsive, couldn't help but shout angrily in the face of Wang Luo's overbearing attitude. "Boy, you're courting death." Hu Fei couldn't help but shout at Wang Luo for looking at the 100-Flower Fairy so unscrupulously in front of everyone. In response to Hu Fei's angry shout, Wang Luo looked at Xiao Chen and the others and found that they were all familiar faces that he had seen in the starry sky. Wang Luo said indifferently, "Since you've repelled the space bandits, I'll spare your lives." Scram, such a beauty is not someone you can profane. Wang Luo did not seem to care about Xiao Chen and the others at all. Seeing this, Hu Fei was even more furious. Even the Qing Emperor exuded a faint murderous aura. Only Qin Yu still looked relaxed. Obviously, he did not take Wang Luo's words to heart. Perhaps in Qin Yu's opinion, Wang Luo was already a dying man, so there was no point in arguing with him. He didn't take Xiao Chen and the others seriously at all. Obviously, Wang Luo hadn't heard of the sacred palace either. However, just as he finished speaking, a saint of the Fallen River Saint sect beside him whispered to him, "Young sect master, I'm afraid something's wrong." Except for Hu Fei, Xiao Chen and the others didn't show the slightest panic. they were still so calm in the face of two saints. What did this mean? It meant that Xiao Chen and the others didn't fear Wang Luo and the Fallen River Saint sect behind them at all. Of course, Xiao Chen and the others didn't know the details of the Fallen River Saint sect, but even so, a mere Fallen River Saint sect wasn't enough to make the sacred palace fear them. In front of a quasi-saint sect, there was no doubt that a sacred sect could only bow down to them. The older, the wiser. The Fallen River Saint sect saint had already sensed that something was wrong from Xiao Chen and the others, but Wang Luo didn't believe it at all. After such a long time, Wang Luo still couldn't forget the 100-flower fairy. Now that he could finally see the beauty again, Wang Luo couldn't care less about anything else. Therefore, after hearing the Fallen River Saint sect saint's words, Wang Luo said indifferently, "Is there anyone in the Tianqian continent that the Fallen River Saint sect is afraid of? I must take this woman away today." Say no more. No matter what, Wang Luo was going to take the 100-flower fairy away today. As for Xiao Chen and the others, if they dared to stop him, he would directly kill them. Wang Luo was used to being lawless since he was young and thought that he could look down on anyone with the Fallen River Saint sect's support. Little did he know that he had really kicked an iron plate this time. Hearing Wang Luo's words, the faces of the two Fallen River Saint sect saints beside him turned extremely ugly. For some reason, the two saints suddenly had a bad premonition. It was as if Wang Luo's actions would cause unbearable consequences for the Fallen River Saint sect. As expected, not long after Wang Luo's words, Saint Qing Ju and the other 8 Saint Palace Saint Venerables appeared in the sky. When they saw Saint Qing Ju and the other Saint Venerables appear, and all 8 of them were wearing the golden robes of the Saint Palace Saint Venerables, they didn't need to think to know that the 8 of them were from the same faction. When they thought of how Xiao Chen and the others were also wearing golden robes, the two Fallen River Saint sect saints' expressions changed drastically. 8 Saint Realm experts were enough to crush Wang Luo and the others, but Wang Luo still spoke recklessly. "What, do you want to stop me? Do you know who I am? Have you heard of the Fallen River Saint sect?" Wang Luo thought that the Fallen River Saint sect could suppress Xiao Chen and the others, but when he spoke, an indifferent voice sounded from the sky. "Oh, so what about the Fallen River Saint sect? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 962. Xiao Sheng, who was dressed in a blue robe, appeared on the field with these indifferent words. Unlike the dazzling golden robes worn by saints such as Xiao Chen and Saint Qing Ju, Xiao Sheng's attire couldn't be more ordinary. Coupled with the fact that he didn't exude any aura, Xiao Chen looked like a person that no one would take a second look at if he was thrown into a crowd. He gave off the impression that he was an ordinary person. However, the two saints from the Fallen River Saint sect didn't think so. Although Xiao Sheng didn't exude any aura when he appeared, no one would think that Xiao Sheng was an ordinary person without any cultivation base, since he could appear out of thin air without anyone noticing. The two saints from the Fallen River Saint sect frowned as they looked at Xiao Sheng solemnly. After a long while, one of the saints seemed to have realized something and his expression changed drastically. He looked as though he had seen a ghost and his back was instantly drenched in sweat. What exactly had he sensed that could make a saint so terrified in an instant? It was as though he had seen a ghost. Sensing the change in this saint, another saint from the Fallen River Saint sect asked in confusion. "What's wrong?" He's a quasi-saint." Facing the saint's question, the saint who was almost scared out of his wits stuttered. "That's right." This saint felt a shred of the aura of a secondary saint from Xiao Sheng. As a saint of the Fallen River Saint sect, although the Fallen River Saint sect was only a saint clan, it had been in existence for so many years. Naturally, the Fallen River Saint sect had come into contact with secondary saint clans. Moreover, there was actually a quasi-sage sect behind the Fallen River Saint sect. It could be considered as the protector of the Fallen River Saint sect. However, the Fallen River Saint sect had to pay a hefty price every year for such a protector. He had once been fortunate enough to see a quasi-saint from a quasi-saint sect from afar. That feeling was exactly the same as facing Xiao Sheng now. Moreover, the pressure that Xiao Sheng gave him was even more obvious. There was clearly no aura coming from Xiaosheng, but the saint from the Fallen River Saint sect felt a bone-deep pressure when he faced Xiaosheng. This pressure made him involuntarily tremble from the bottom of his heart. The two saints from the Fallen River Saint sect were scared out of their wits. It was hard to imagine that a quasi-saint sect would be standing in front of them at this moment. Moreover, it was simply unimaginable that there would be a quasi-saint sect on the small Tianqian continent. At this moment, the two saints simultaneously recalled a piece of news that had come from the Tiana continent some time ago. It was that a new sect had been established by gathering the strength of the entire Tiana continent. However, the Fallen River Saint sect did not take this rumor seriously. After all, a newly established saint sect was not worthy of the Fallen River Saint sect's attention. Who would have thought that this newly established saint sect was not a saint sect, but a quasi-saint sect? Xiaosheng's appearance made the two saints from the Fallen River Saint sect completely lose their composure. However, Wang Luo still did not realize the situation and still dared to threaten them. "What, do you really want to attack me? Come if you have the guts. If anything happens to me, everyone on the Tianqian continent will be buried with me." The two saints, who were still thinking of using the Fallen River Saint sect to threaten the sacred palace, cursed in their hearts when they heard Wang Luo's words. He was simply an idiot. Even now, Wang Luo still did not realize that the sacred palace in front of him was a quasi-saint sect. It was obvious that a quasi-saint sect would not be afraid of a sacred sect. Wang Luo was only the young sect master of the Fallen River Saint sect. Even if his father, the sect master of the Fallen River Saint sect, personally came, the sacred palace would probably not care about him. They desperately signaled Wang Luo to stop talking. In the end, one of the saints did not even care about Wang Luo's identity and forcibly restrained him, not allowing him to continue speaking. The other saint cupped his hands and bowed to Xiaosheng, his forehead drenched in cold sweat. "My lords, please forgive us. Our young sect master is young and insensible. If he has offended you in any way, I hope that you will be magnanimous. In the future, the Fallen River Saint sect will definitely give you an explanation." A sacred sect, an existence that could easily destroy the Fallen River Saint sect. How could they dare to be presumptuous? Their attitude was very humble, but when Wang Luo saw this, he scolded angrily, "What are you doing? As a saint of the Fallen River Saint sect, how can you be so humble? How shameful! Let me go, let me go." Wang Luo felt that the Fallen River Saint sect didn't need to lower their heads to the Saint Palace at all. Hearing his words, the two saints of the Fallen River Saint sect simply wanted to kill Wang Luo directly. He was simply an idiot. Seeing the saint of the Fallen River Saint sect groveling, Xiao Chen and the others, including Saint Qingju, did not say anything. Only Xiaosheng said indifferently, "Explanation? No need to go through so much trouble. Today, the few of you are here to explain. Since you have come to the Tianqian continent, there is no need to leave. Stay." Xiaosheng's tone was very calm, but when it stopped in the ears of the two saints of the Fallen River Saint sect, it was like a sudden clap of thunder. "It's over," the two of them thought at the same time. Compared to the two saints, Wang Luo was still arrogant as he shouted, "Leave us here? Humph, who do you think you are? I am standing here today. What do you dare to do to me? Let me tell you, I am the young sect master of the Fallen River Saint sect. If you dare to touch me, the saints of the Fallen River Saint sect will definitely flatten the Tianqian continent." He was still threatening Xiaosheng rudely. Hearing this, Xiaosheng did not say anything more. A terrifying aura soared from his body. This aura was far beyond that of a saint. It was clearly something that only a quasi-saint could possess. When he sensed the aura, the saint of the Fallen River Saint sect who spoke earlier had a change in expression. He immediately knelt on the ground and begged Xiaosheng for mercy. "Quasi-sage, we didn't do it on purpose. Please be magnanimous and forgive us." Quasi-saint was the title of a quasi-saint. Only a quasi-saint was worthy of this title. However, in the face of this saint's begging, Xiaosheng smiled faintly. Then, he slowly reached out his right hand. Without any visible movement, he grasped the air. A huge palm formed from spiritual energy appeared out of thin air. Then, without any resistance, it grabbed the saint of the fallen river saint sect. With a bang, the saint of the river false sacred sect was crushed to death by Xiaoxing's hand. I said, since you are here, stay. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 963. Following Xiaoxing's words, the saint from the fallen river saint sect exploded. His physical body and saint soul were completely obliterated. Wang Luo was stunned when he saw a saint expert being crushed by Xiaoxing so easily. He no longer cursed angrily and did not dare to struggle in the slightest. By now, no matter how stupid Wang Luo was, he could guess that Xiaoxing was a quasi-saint supreme venerate. A sect with a quasi-saint supreme venerate was undoubtedly a quasi-saint sect. Wang Luo felt as though he had swallowed a fly and felt extremely uncomfortable. He was indeed courting death. He had actually come to a quasi-saint sect to snatch someone and had even spoken so arrogantly. Wang Luo's heart was like stagnant water. His excitement from seeing 100-flower fairy again was completely extinguished as though a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. Now that things had come to this, it was no longer Wang Luo's own business. After offending a quasi-sage sect, Wang Luo's fate was no longer a big deal. This was because if he was slightly careless, the entire Falling River Sacred Sect would probably be destroyed because of his actions. Although the Fallen River Saint Sect also had a quasi-saint sect behind it, the relationship between the two sides was only connected through simple benefits. Who could guarantee that the quasi-saint sect behind the Fallen River Saint Sect would be willing to fight to the death with the Sacred Palace for the Fallen River Saint Sect? It should be known that a war between two quasi-saint sects would definitely shake the world. Moreover, who could be sure of the true strength of the Sacred Palace now? His heart was like stagnant water, but Xiaoxing clearly did not give Wang Luo a chance to regret. After killing the saint from the Fallen River Saint Sect, Xiaoxing struck again and easily killed Wang Luo. Even though he was a saint from the Fallen River Saint Sect and had a saint protecting him, Wang Luo was still unable to retaliate in front of Xiaoxing. The saint from the Fallen River Saint Sect on the side could not do anything at all. Xiaoxing killed Wang Luo in front of the saint from the Fallen River Saint Sect. After that, Xiaoxing looked at the saint and said, "I have a few questions for you." There were some things that they wanted to get answers from this saint. Under Xiaoxing's questioning, it did not take much effort for everyone to learn about the situation of the Fallen River Saint Sect. To talk about the Falling River Saint Sect, one must first talk about the starry sky where the heavenly Qin continent was located. The starry sky was boundless and even secondary saints didn't know how big this world where the 100 races lived or how big this starry sky was. The heavenly Qin continent was as small as a grain of sand in this starry sky. No one knew much about the starry sky, including Xiaoxing. After asking the Fallen River Saint Sect saint, everyone found out that the starry sky where the heavenly Qin continent was located was called the Northern Star Boundary. The entire North Star realm was vast and boundless. Its surface area could no longer be described as large. It was as if there was no end to it. In this vast and boundless North Star realm, there were a total of over 300 known continents, including almost all the races. On these 300 continents, there were a total of over 100 saint-class families under the sect masters. These sect master sects formed the backbone of the North Star realm, but they were not the overlords of the North Star realm. In the North Star realm, the ones who could truly dominate a region were the 6 major secondary saint sections. These 6 major secondary saint sects each occupied a region and controlled the entire North Star realm. Almost all the sect master sects had chosen to attach themselves to one of the secondary saint sections. There was no other way. If one wanted to survive in the North Star realm, one had to choose to attach themselves to one of the secondary saint sections. Otherwise, it would be impossible to survive. Of course, the reason why the Tiana continent and the heavenly Qin continent were not like this was entirely because the heavenly Qin continent was located in a remote place. It was so remote that the 6 major secondary saint sects looked down on it. It was precisely because they looked down on it that none of the 6 major secondary saint sects wanted to waste time in this remote place. Therefore, the 4 continents in the Tiana continent, the Heavenly Qin continent, the Northern Demon continent, and the Blood Demon continent had never come into contact with the secondary saint sections. The Falling River Saint sect was located in the Great Divinity continent, which was a continent headed by the God clan. On the Great Divinity continent, there was also a quasi-saint sect. However, this quasi-saint sect was established by the God clan and was called the Supreme Deity sect. In fact, in the North Star realm, the human race did not have a good life because none of the 6 major secondary saint sects were founded by the human race. In other words, the human race did not have much say in the North Star realm because there were no secondary saint sects in the human race. The Supreme Saint sect of the Divine race. The Demonic Sky Palace of the Demon race. The Myriad Beast Valley of the Beast race. The Night Ghost Pavilion of the Gui Zoo. The Liwang sect of the Brute race. The Ninth Heaven of the Divine race. There was no human race in these 6 major secondary saint sects at all. However, this was in the past. Now, with the breakthrough of Shaosheng and the other 3 and the transfer of power from the Sacred Palace, the human race finally had a secondary saint sect to oversee the North Star realm. Perhaps it was for this reason that the Saint of the Falling River Saint sect had told everything to Shaosheng without hiding anything because Shaosheng had killed Wang Luo. Perhaps in the saint's heart, Wang Luo was too insignificant compared to the entire human race. Even though Shaosheng had killed Wang Luo, he was still a secondary saint and a secondary saint of the human race. Therefore, the saint of the human race could only disrespect the human race's secondary saints because of Wang Luo's death. The human race needed a quasi-sage too much. At the same time, they also needed a quasi-sage sect. This way, the human ancestor would have more say in the North Star boundary. He would no longer be a fish on the chopping block of other races like before. He could also guess what the saint was thinking. At the same time, his respect for Shaosheng was absolutely from the bottom of his heart. Therefore, after hearing his words, Shaosheng did not kill him again. He just looked at him and said indifferently, "I'll let you live. Go. You should know how the Falling River Saint sect should choose. If there is a next time, you should know what will happen to the Falling River Saint sect." First of all, there was no deep hatred between the 2 sides. To put it bluntly, it was because Wang Luo had courted death. Now that Wang Luo had been killed, there was no need for Shaosheng to be so ruthless. Secondly, they were all from the human race. In the North Star boundary, the human race was not the only race that existed. In fact, the human race was not considered a strong race in the North Star boundary. They had always had to act according to the wishes of other races. With strong enemies surrounding them, if the human race still fought among themselves, it would only benefit other races. Therefore, Shaosheng did not do anything to the Falling River Saint sect. Of course, this was on the premise that the Falling River Saint sect was tactful. If the Falling River Saint sect did not know what was good for them, Shaosheng would not be polite. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 964. Upon hearing Shaosheng's words, the saint from the Fallen River Sacred Sect bowed respectfully. "Thank you, Supreme Sovereign." The saint from the Fallen River Sacred Sect didn't have much hatred for Shaosheng and the Sacred Palace. Compared to Wang Luo's death, the human race needed a quasi-saint sect. Only then could the human race have more say in the North Star boundary. After bowing and leaving, Shaosheng and the others didn't stop them. They watched as the starship from the Fallen River Sacred Sect rose into the sky and quickly disappeared into the clouds. Shaosheng and the others also returned to the Sacred Palace. From the saint from the Fallen River Sacred Sect, everyone had a rough idea of the North Star boundaries situation. The Heavenly Qin continent had always been located in the North Star boundary. Unfortunately, because it was located far away, the Heavenly Qin continent had no contact with the other continents in the North Star boundary. On the way back to the dustless sacred hall, although Xiaochen didn't say anything, Qinshuru and the other two girls already knew from his expression that Xiaochen was already fascinated by the boundless North Star boundary. What's wrong? Does my husband want to go to the North Star boundary to train? Sitting beside Xiaochen, Hundred Flower Fairy smiled. Hundred Flower Fairy's words had indeed touched Xiaochen's heart. After hearing about the North Star boundary, Xiaochen indeed wanted to go to the North Star boundary to train. If a person didn't even see what the world they lived in was like with their own eyes, wouldn't they have lived in vain? However, now wasn't the time to leave. The sacred palace had just been established. As the leader of the 10 Chosens, Xiaochen obviously couldn't leave at this time. Only when the sacred palace was truly stabilized could Xiaochen set his mind at ease. With a look of longing on his face, Xiaochen didn't deny Hundred Flower Fairy's words. He said indifferently, the North Star boundary. One day, I will definitely go there. Big brother Xiaochen, I'm afraid you won't have to go to the North Star boundary to train yourself when the time comes. Gu Lingyao said when she heard Xiaochen's words. Oh, what does Lingyao mean? Xiaochen asked. Are you stupid? Big brother Xiaochen, think about it. Now that the Sacred Palace has become the only quasi-saint sect in the North Star boundary, the other forces in the North Star boundary will naturally take the initiative to contact the Sacred Palace, including the other 6 quasi-saint sections. This way, won't Brother Xiaoxing be able to come in contact with the other forces and races in the North Star boundary? Gu Lingyao's words. Xiaochen nodded in agreement when he heard her words. It was indeed as Gu Lingyao had said. The sudden emergence of a quasi-saint sect would naturally cause a sensation in the North Star boundary. It wouldn't be long before many forces would take the initiative to contact the Sacred Palace. When that time came, the Sacred Palace would naturally integrate into the North Star boundary. The little girl was right, but it was still too early to talk about this. Let's wait and see. The Sacred Palace would naturally occupy a place in the North Star boundary once it was established. Xiaochen temporarily suppressed the idea of going to the North Star boundary to train and continued to stay in the Sacred Palace. At the same time, half a month later, in the Fallen River Sacred Sect located on the Taishan continent, the saint who had returned from the Heavenly Qin continent finally arrived. The starship had just landed and without any pause, the saint immediately went to meet the sect master of the Fallen River Sacred Sect, Wang Luo's father, Wang Qifeng. On this trip to the Heavenly Qin continent, not only did Wang Luo die, but the human clan finally had a quasi-saint sect. This was such an important matter that the saint naturally had to report to Wang Qifeng as soon as possible. Moreover, it wasn't just him. The other saints of the Fallen River Sacred Sect obviously had the right to know as well. Therefore, when the saint rushed to the main hall of the Fallen River Sacred Sect, he also sent someone to inform the other saints to hurry to the main hall of the Fallen River Sacred Sect. In less than 15 minutes, more than 10 saints had gathered in the main hall of the Fallen River Sacred Sect. The leader was naturally the sect master of the Fallen River Sacred Sect, Wang Qifeng. All the saints looked at the saint who had returned from the Heavenly Qin continent. Wang Qifeng was the first to speak. What happened? Why did you gather everyone in the main hall? Gathering all the saints of the Fallen River Sacred Sect together was obviously not a small matter. In response to Wang Qifeng's question, the saint pondered for a moment before answering. Sect Master, this trip to the Heavenly Qin continent is indeed a big matter. The young sect master has died. After thinking about it, the saint decided to speak frankly. After all, this matter couldn't be hidden. Although he knew that Wang Qifeng would definitely fly into a rage after hearing about Wang Luo's death, there was nothing he could do. As expected, Wang Qifeng was initially stunned when he heard those words, but he quickly flew into a rage. A terrifying pressure spread out from his body as he looked at the saint expert and shouted coldly. What did you say? Luo has died? Say it again. For a moment, Wang Qifeng couldn't accept the fact that Wang Luo had been killed and asked angrily. In response to Wang Qifeng's question, the saint took a deep breath and said, Sect Master, the young sect master has indeed died. After hearing the saint's answer again, a murderous intent gathered in Wang Qifeng's eyes. Forcefully controlling his emotions, Wang Qifeng said in a deep voice, "Speak. What exactly happened?" For a moment, Wang Qifeng really wanted to slap this saint to death. He and another saint had followed Wang Luo to the heavenly Qin continent, but in the end, Wang Luo and that saint had died at the same time, and only he had returned. Wang Qifeng had wanted to kill him for a long time, but this person was a saint of the Fallen River Saint sect after all. His status was not ordinary, so Wang Qifeng could not really kill him in front of so many people. Otherwise, what would the other saints think? Forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, Wang Qifeng asked the saint to tell the whole story in detail. In response, the saint nodded and then told the story in detail to everyone present. In fact, the saints of the Fallen River Sacred Sect were gathered here not because of Wang Luo, but because of the Sacred Palace. That was the most important thing. Therefore, when he talked about the Sacred Palace, the saint gave a very detailed explanation. After hearing his description, the saints of the Fallen River Sacred Sect were all completely stunned. A secondary saint sect had actually appeared in the remote heavenly Qin continent? How was that possible? Some people didn't believe it, while others were shocked. However, the saint who returned from the heavenly Qin continent didn't seem to be lying. Moreover, the appearance of a quasi-saint sect was such an important matter that no one dared to talk nonsense about it. Therefore, after the initial shock, more than half of the saints chose to believe the saint's words. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 965. As soon as the saint finished speaking, the entire main hall of the Fallen River Sacred Sect fell silent. All the saints, including Wang Qifeng, fell into complete silence. The human race finally had a quasi-sage sect. This was a matter that was enough to cause a huge earthquake in the entire North Star boundary. No one had expected that a quasi-saint sect would appear in the remote heavenly Qin continent and that Wang Luo had been killed by a quasi-saint from the Sacred Palace. In the face of a quasi-sage, even the protection of two saints was obviously insufficient. Therefore, after knowing the whole story, none of the saints present blamed this saint for not protecting Wang Luo well. After all, in the face of a quasi-sage, it was already very difficult for a saint to protect himself, let alone protect others. After a moment of silence, one of the saints sitting below Wang Qifeng looked at Wang Qifeng. He was the Grand Elder of the Fallen River Sacred Sect and his status was second only to Wang Qifeng's. Therefore, he was more concerned about Wang Qifeng's decision. Wang Qifeng was well aware of Wang Luo's position in Wang Qifeng's heart. After all, Wang Qifeng only had one son, Wang Luo. Now that his only son had been killed, it would be a lie to say that Wang Qifeng didn't want to take revenge. However, the one who had killed Wang Luo this time was a quasi-sage sect. The River Falls Sacred Sect was an insignificant existence in front of it. If Wang Qifeng were to lead the saints of the Fallen River Holy Sect to avenge Wang Luo, the only path that awaited the Fallen River Holy Sect would be annihilation. Afraid that Wang Qifeng would do something irrational on impulse, the First Elder looked at him. After hesitating a few times, he finally opened his mouth and said, "Don't worry. Sect Master, you can't." The First Elder wanted to persuade Wang Qifeng to calm down, but before he could finish speaking, Wang Qifeng directly interrupted him. "All right, I know. You don't need to say anything more. I didn't expect that our human race would have a secondary saint sect. This is a good thing for our human race. As such, how can I be someone who doesn't see the big picture? I already know about Luo's matter, so don't mention it again." The saints did not want Wang Qifeng to find trouble with the Sacred Palace. This was not only because of the Sacred Palace's strength, but also because the human race of the North Star boundary needed the Sacred Palace too much. It was no exaggeration to say that the Sacred Palace would soon become the leader of the human race. Wang Qifeng was the first to leave the main hall. From the looks of it, he was still unable to let go of Wang Luo's death. However, this was only human nature. After all, Wang Qifeng was Wang Qifeng's only child. It would be strange if Wang Qifeng wasn't grieving over Wang Luo's death. After Wang Qifeng expressed his stance, the saints did not think too much about it. They discussed whether they should send someone to the heavenly Qin continent to formally pay a visit to the sacred palace. However, while the saints of the Fallen River Holy Sect were thinking about formally paying a visit to the sacred palace, Wang Qifeng, who had left the main hall alone, returned to his residence. He could no longer control the anger in his heart and smashed everything in his room to vent his anger. Now that he was alone, Wang Qifeng no longer looked the same as before. His eyes were bloodshot, like a wild beast ready to devour someone at any moment. Sitting in the messy room, Wang Qifeng muttered coldly, "Sacred palace, divine palace. How dare you kill my Luo'er? I don't dare to believe that you're a secondary saint sect of the human race. Even the entire human race cannot compare to my Luo'er." In Wang Qifeng's heart, the entire human race couldn't compare to Wang Luo. As his voice fell, Wang Qifeng took a deep breath and the anger in his eyes quickly subsided. However, the chill he involuntarily emitted still made people shudder. He absolutely could not let this go. However, if he wanted to deal with the sacred palace, it was impossible to rely on the Fallen River Holy Sect alone. Even if Wang Qifeng was the sect master, the other saints of the Fallen River Holy Sect would obviously not agree to let him deal with the sacred palace. Since he could not use the power of the Fallen River Holy Sect, Wang Qifeng only had one choice left, and that was the Supreme Divine Sect. The Supreme Divine Sect was a secondary saint sect founded by the God race. There were a total of 3 secondary saint great sovereigns in the sect. One of the great sovereigns that Wang Qifeng was familiar with was called Yadun. He believed that the Supreme Divine Sect did not want to see a secondary saint sect appear in the human race. Therefore, Wang Qifeng's first thought was to use the Supreme Divine Sect to destroy the sacred palace and avenge his son. It had to be said that Wang Qifeng's idea was indeed too extreme. He only wanted to avenge his son and had not considered that he, Wang Qifeng, was a member of the human race. Now that he wanted to use a secondary saint sect of the God race to destroy a secondary saint sect of the human race, this was no different from betraying the human race. Wang Qifeng did not hesitate to betray the entire human race for his son. Perhaps it was because of his character that he had raised a son like Wang Luo. No one knew that Wang Qifeng took advantage of the darkness of the night to leave the Fallen River Holy Sect alone and secretly head in the direction of the Supreme Divine Sect. As the ruler of the Great God Continent, the Supreme Divine Sect was located in the center of the Great God Continent. Wang Qifeng finally arrived at the Supreme Divine Sect after one night. Because he had often come to the Supreme Divine Sect in the past, he did not encounter any obstructions. Wang Qifeng smoothly entered the Sky Saint Sect and went all the way to the cave dwelling in the deepest part of the Supreme Divine Sect. This was the cave dwelling of one of the 3 secondary saints of the Sky Saint Sect, Yadun. Wang Qifeng respectfully bowed and said, "Wang Qifeng pays his respects to the Supreme Sovereign." Following Wang Qifeng's words, a deep voice came from within the cave. "Come in." After receiving permission, Wang Qifeng carefully entered the cave dwelling. The cave dwelling was very large. Wang Qifeng saw Yadun sitting cross-legged on a mountain peak. Like other members of the God race, Yadun had long golden hair, fair skin, and deep blue eyes. He bowed respectfully to Arden. At the same time, Arden slowly opened his eyes and said calmly, "Is something the matter?" Reporting to the Supreme Sovereign, "There is indeed a matter." "Speak." "A few days ago, our Falling River Saint Sect accidentally discovered a quasi-saint sect founded by the human clan in the heavenly Qin continent. We have confirmed that there are quasi-saint great venerables in it, but we don't know the exact number and cultivation realm." Wang Qifeng did not dare to beat around the bush in front of Yadun and directly stated the purpose of his visit. Of course, Wang Qifeng had already thought of these words. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.